Might as well go live. People can catch up. Is your camera set to 720?
Actually, yeah, it is.
Okay. We just get the sketchy internet.
No, 720p. Yep.
Good.
Yep. No, I had the same. Like, Facebook automatically downgrades it to 320.
Facebook. I do not understand the Facebook. Speaking of, I put a link in the. Is my sound coming out through your speakers too? Take off your headphones. See if you can hear me through your speakers.
Nope.
It's just your headphones are really loud.
My headphones are bad? I'll turn it back.
I can hear myself through your microphone.
Sweet. Let's see.
What was I saying? Da, 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 da. Oh, look, we got 4 people listening already or watching or whatever.
I can't hear you at all.
What? No. I did put a link. I just tell you this now. I put a link.
We have 4 lurkers? We have lurkers?
Mm-hmm. That's right. Well, I promoted it on social. I put a link to Telegram because, as we kill Facebook and Twitter, seems like that's until Apple kills Telegram, which they're threatening to do.
Yeah, I like it.
But that's like a secure chat channel, so.
I like it.
And you're on there. I'm on there for whatever reason. I got it installed. I mean, whatever.
It's just, what did I go into yesterday? Oh, Disclose TV.
Right.
I went into that, and all of a sudden there's just all these people talking on there. It was freaky.
Right.
It's like walking into a party that you're not invited to.
Well, yeah. See, that's why I moved to Telegram, just to pick up those few channels that are actually valuable from Twitter.
Yeah.
And the thing I like about Telegram is you can download video. So if somebody shares a video on there, you can download it and reshare the video easily.
Yeah.
More easily than like Twitter or Facebook. So.
Yeah.
Or Instagram especially. And no, we're not on this show is not on Instagram, so
no.
I don't see the point.
Isn't it even is it possible to do that?
What? Oh yeah, no, they have live video in there.
I know, but
and then I said in the title for this episode that we were going to talk Solzhenitsyn because we talked about it. And I know you said debrief, but we can debrief in the midst of Solzhenitsyn.
What do we talk about from Solzhenitsyn? Are we allowed?
I guess so. I mean, that's the whole point of the show, isn't it? That we read the stuff we're not allowed to read.
Oh, that's right. Even if, okay.
Is this a soft start? Is that what we're doing here?
Is that your children?
I have this fantastic mic, and it picks up everything out there. Apparently,
geez.
Yeah.
So what is on Saturday? Somebody said that about my kids. They asked me a question about what was it? Oh, because I was at the gym, and then my friend Brittany brought her and her husband brought their 3 daughters.
Okay.
Her youngest is 2, and like any 2 or 3-year-old, when you see thousands of square feet of squishy mats, you want to run on them. And
too bad the walls aren't padded too, right?
The walls are padded, yes, because it's jiu-jitsu and MMA, so you need padded walls. Otherwise, you would go through the drywall. But I was talking to her about that, and we were joking about our kids and behavior. And I said, listen, my kids are slightly domesticated at this point. So
slightly.
don't think it gets better as they get older. It doesn't.
All right. Yes. So no, the work is Live Not by Lies. We talked about this. It's an essay.
Yeah.
It's this. It was dated the same day that the secret police broke into his apartment and arrested him and took him to East Germany.
Live Not by Lies by
West
Rod
Germany.
Dreher.
Well, that's the book, but this is the essay that he took the name from.
No, I'm on Google now, so of course they're censoring Solzhenitsyn.
Are they?
Well, apparently, because the only link that is listed in the first 20 searches is Dreher's book.
Oh, well, no, that's just because he's a super promoter. All right, I'll put it here.
Yes, that's the reason it is. It's not because Google's for hire.
So those want to follow along at home, I put it in the...
Isn't it interesting that people actually still debate about whether or not there's free speech when we're literally mocking and making memes about the fact that we don't have free speech?
Any way we can boost Riley's levels a bit.
My levels? You want me to turn it up? All right. Yes, there is. Is that better?
It's better on this end.
All right. Well, whoever said that, I suppose I could switch to comments so I actually know what's happening. Hey, Paul.
Paul said it. Yeah, I switched to comments
Steve
too.
Simon. He's one of my ninjas.
Is he? Good.
Yep.
Good to meet you, Steve.
Proselytizes for my congregation.
Oh, I like it. The ninjas. They're the best.
That's right.
All right. And what was the other thing we were going to do when we opened up?
Oh, yeah. We were going to, once we start recording, we're going to ask everybody to flood 1517 with emails about how awesome the show is and how much they want us to talk more about the two kingdoms and politics and social
Worldview.
Worldview.
Mhm.
Three states, that kind of stuff.
Christians interacting with the world.
Yes. That would be super helpful and beneficial so that, I'll get there eventually, that those who write our checks know that that's the kind of content that our listeners want.
Oh, well, actually, I think you got it. So when they send the note, attach the note to a donation.
Yes. There you go.
Which is very powerful.
Yes. What? Money has influence?
Well, someday we'll have thousands of people here, and we'll have super chats, and people can do.
And that's when I lead the revolution. And then we become 1518.org because everybody knows the Heidelberg dissertation is way better than the theses anyways.
What?
That way, when people try to type 1517.org and they mistype, they'll go automatically to our website.
Well, Heidelberg is better, but that's not the point.
Of course it is. That's the first thing I said when Scott told me what the name of the organization. I'm like, why is it 1517? 1518 was a way better year. It's a way better document.
A fine Chateaubriand and
that's right.
a
nice brie.
What was the
stinky cheese?
What's the wine that everybody talks about? Chateau. No,
Chateaubriand.
Briand is the steak, right? But
no,
Dupop. Dupop.
The Dupop. See, I only like port, so.
Yeah, well, you're out there then.
I'm just saying, when you come to the communion table at my house and you kneel and you receive Jesus' blood, you know you just received Jesus' blood. Good morning, Dalton.
Dalton says, hopefully there's some listeners. GameStop's down $120 per share this morning, but
the game is rigged.
The game is rigged. No, but it's just market manipulation. They have this thing called short laddering.
Right.
Do you know about this?
I do. I've heard of it before because I'm familiar with.
This is what they did it on Friday too. I learned about it on Friday. I was watching the ticker, and so they just move their short funds between each other, and it causes this huge fluctuation to happen in the price.
Don't you remember during the Madoff years when not just the Enron stuff, but it was the president, the head of the toy company, Tyco or whatever.
Okay. Oh yeah, Tyco. Yeah.
Remember even the other rich billionaire master villains were like, dude, that's way too, like he had like the gold umbrella stands and then he had all of these houses that he had never even walked into before. And his entire bathroom in his office was gold plated. So all these other billionaire hedge fund managers are like, dude, like you're greedy. Okay. Like you're super greedy.
Right. It's down 102 at the moment.
When other supervillains say that you're too villainous, you might have gone too far. It's like Malta, actually. Can you imagine Churchill, Roosevelt, Stalin, and who else? Who was the fourth that was there?
I don't know.
Just those three. It was just those three. I just can't even imagine sitting in for a photo op with Stalin at that point, because they all knew what he was doing.
Wasn't he Man of the Year on Time Magazine, or was that Lenin?
That was Hitler.
Well, Hitler was too.
I think Lenin was.
Was Lenin?
Which, given current circumstances, shouldn't surprise anybody.
What, that hindsight's 2020?
You can either trust history or trust politics, but you can't do both.
There
we go, talking about politics at the top of the show again.
Okay, well, we're not recording yet. We should start that.
Yes, let's start offending donors now.
Okay, I'm rolling. You're rolling?
I am. I got the dots.
Good.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. This is the Banned Books Podcast, episode number 190? One. I knew it. I leaned into it. And as always, we are the hosts of this rickety old wagon of a podcast, Christopher Gillespie.
I'm not intrepid today?
No, I don't feel intrepid. I feel more punk rock.
Okay. Chilling and willing?
That after, yeah.
Maxing and relaxing? That's not very punk at all. That's more hippie, but oh well.
It is, yeah, but that's okay. Your parents are kind of hippies.
Yeah, they don't consider themselves hippies, but it's more of an ethos than it is a lifestyle.
Right. I think, though, to be a true hippie, you can't consider yourself a hippie. It is just your lifestyle.
You just don't even know it.
I think so, because people refer to me and Annie as hippies just because we grow our own food and bake and,
Well,
sew
and
clothes
also
and
family
stuff.
size, right?
Yeah, that seems to be
You
part of
can't,
it too.
yeah, because you created your own commune.
It's not 100%. Well, militia at this point. That's what we're shooting for.
When the Muslims come,
Yeah, no.
oh no,
Too late.
oh and shoot, I just broke the political
You did. That's
correctness
okay.
button. YouTube, ban us.
That was our most popular episode, though.
One of them, absolutely. Went
Yeah.
back and looked at the stats.
Islam is a Christian heresy by
John of Damascus.
John of Damascus, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So apparently,
2,500
Mhm.
listens or something.
Yeah. So that's where we're at. We're going to read Alexander Solzhenitsyn today.
Mm-hmm. This is what we do on the show. We read something that is you're not supposed to read, like Google blocks.
Thus, the Band of Books podcast.
But we often don't get to it right away. So if you're watching the YouTube, we might chat a little bit and then
Right. If you need
get to it
to
eventually.
go to the bathroom or make some coffee or brunch, run
We
to the
did-
post office.
We did get some feedback from last week. It wasn't
we
a
did.
negative, but we got a lot of feedback. But somebody on Facebook said 2 hours? ? But they weren't being negative because I prompted them
Oh,
to
you
find
didn't
out.
chop the episode in half? You just threw it up?
No, it was 190, 2 hours long. What do? Listen to the first. Most people only listen to the first half of anything that we put up, even if it's
That's
40
true.
minutes long.
Yeah.
They kind of
That's
get the
how we
gist
fooled
of.
the censors. Everybody
Well, they
gives
get-
up after the first 28 minutes.
Yeah, we put all the juicy stuff at the end.
That's right.
We're telling you all the
Yeah.
secrets to listening
Speaking of
to the
which, I've been
show.
going back again and listening to old Black Sabbath.
There's some good stuff there.
Volume 4,
Mm-hmm.
album number 4, which is just called Black Sabbath 4.
Right.
It's one of those things when I discovered Black Sabbath later because the thing is, when I got into metal in high school, it was more Judas Priest, Iron Maiden,
Mhm.
80s metal, because that's when I was growing up, and I was junior and senior in high school, 88, 89.
We were Metallica, but yeah.
And Metallica, of course, Slayer a little bit. But I mean, Slayer was where that's all the burnouts that hung out on the corner and smoked
Those were the
cigarettes.
older people.
Those were the hardcore guys that wore
Yeah.
like the Exodus and the Overkill and the Slayer shirts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for most of us, we listened to Master of Puppets, and that was, like I said, Maiden, Judas Priest, that kind of thing.
Right.
And then in college, I discovered Pantera, and I was like, "Pfft, to hell with the rest of this stuff.
Right.
Far Beyond Driven is a classic. But when I discovered Black Sabbath when I got to college, then I thought, well, it's not that sexy because it's the beginnings of what would eventually become heavy metal. It's more blues based. It's more what we call hard rock, right? It's just a lot of fuzz. And Bill Ward was a jazz drummer before he joined
Right.
Black
Right.
Sabbath, so he's got all these really polyrhythmic beats in the songs. And Geezer Butler's an amazing bassist. I was a bassist at the time, and so Geezer Butler totally turned me on. But then as I've gotten older, it's been the more mature albums. Like I've gone back and I was listening to Heaven and Hell over the weekend, which is the Dio album, which is just beginning to end is just like one of the greatest albums of the 70s. It's amazing. But listening to Masters of Reality and Black Sabbath 4, that's what I mean. Is like Bill, like that's the mature Black Sabbath. They figured
Right.
out how to be a studio band while simultaneously completely drugged out of their minds. Like,
4
that's-
just came out. They did a anniversary reissue with
Yeah.
a bunch of bonus stuff and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's got like Snowblind, Psychonauts. I mean, it's crazy. Like almost every song on that album, Changes is on that album. So you have, and I'm actually segueing into something church related.
I knew you were going to get there eventually.
Is that you have on the one hand, they've mastered the studio. They're a studio band now. So you have these extremely complex songs like Snowblind, which is actually about doing cocaine, but musically it's an amazing song. It's got all these time changes. It's polyrhythmic. The solo's amazing. Ozzy's vocals are amazing. Geezer Butler's bass line is just like a Keith Moon. It's like all fill. And then once in a while he hits the beat. And yet simultaneously, like I said, it's right as they're self-destructing as a band. Like
Yeah,
they're about
right.
to come apart at the seams because of the drugs, and they're about to kick Ozzy out. Which again, Black Sabbath kicked Ozzy out for doing too many drugs. If that gives you an idea of how many drugs he did.
And yet he's still alive.
And yet still alive, exactly. Many trips to Switzerland for blood transfusions.
Oh, is that how you do it?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
Keith Richards and all those guys did that. Eric Clapton. So the thing about then the album is there's this like with Snowblind, there's this underlying subtext musically, especially with Bill Ward's drumming. This could come apart at any moment. You can feel it underneath, and yet it's still blues based. So there's still that timing and that implicit like, oh, this is home, this is comfortable, this is good. That's what we were talking about after church yesterday when I texted you about, is that some of the members are like, yeah, it's like you come to church and you have this liturgy and you have the hymns and you have the prayers and it's all tight and it's good and it's got good order and there's the liturgy and it holds us and it's very comforting. And then simultaneously, your personality in this sermon creates this subtext, this undertone of like, this could come apart at any minute.
It's like longboarding down, a mountain.
Right. Exactly. Actually, I filmed some guys longboarding in San Diego when I was out there with my brother. It's the same thing. They're going 50, 60, 70 miles an hour down the side of a mountain.
On a skateboard.
Around these blind curves.
Right.
And my job and my brother's job, because we were filming at different parts on the mountain, were just to let them know via the text, hey, there's a car coming. Or at that moment, there was an entire platoon of cyclists going up the side of the mountain. So they have longboarders coming down at like 70 miles an hour, and then you have these cyclists going up at like 5 miles an hour. And he was like, well, we'll see what happens. And yeah, as they go around the corners especially, and they lean into the corner, and you might go off the edge, you might not go off the edge, which is kind of the point. That's the excitement of it. And so yeah, I think, in my opinion, right, that if there's not an element of danger, if there's not that feeling of like this could go wrong at any minute, this could just explode at any minute, is it really worthwhile?
You're always in control, though.
Of course.
But you give the appearance. Well, and I think part of that is just rhetoric, right? You're trying to keep people listening, and if they know where it's going, if they've heard it all before, it's not that they get bored, but they're not engaged in the same way.
The shamanic practice of circular breathing, for example, the dervishes, our classic example, the desert mystics, the dervishes practice circular breathing, meaning they were able to cycle their breathing out their nose and through their mouth and maintain their equilibrium as they're spinning constantly, right?
Hence the term whirling dervish.
Right. And there's this sense of like at any moment, they're just going to fall over or crash into each other and bounce off of each other like beads inside of a skillet. And they don't, because they practice this. And Ginsberg said this about Bob Dylan when he first hit, is that Dylan is like, he's got that circular breathing and it's in the lyrics, the rhetoric of his music, because he doesn't have a good voice and he's not a good musician and he has no stage presence or charisma whatsoever. But once he starts...
Oh, that's not true.
Maybe early on he did a little bit.
Right.
But by like 70, 71, when he's like, I'm done with this, I'm going to go make a country album.
No, I mean, that is his stage presence, is that aloofness.
But at that time, if you look at everything around him, the Stones, the Beatles, the Who...
They're smashing guitars and setting things on fire
again,
and things.
Chaos. Jimi Hendrix lighting his guitar on fire and all that stuff,
right?
It's chaos. And then Dylan just stands there and just drones.
Listen.
But exactly. But it's the droning and the circular breathing that he practices that pulls you into the song. And now all of a sudden you're listening.
And you can listen to a 23-minute.
Right.
I don't know if you call it an epic. I mean, it is like an epic poem, except it doesn't make any sense.
Right. It's like Kerouac just writing and then having his girlfriend and his editor just keep taping pages on so he could just keep writing in the stream of consciousness. Or my book.
Your book's organized.
I may or may not have actually written in stream of consciousness and then said to Adam Francisco, "You're my editor, fix it."
That does explain a lot, actually.
It does, right? But I think then to the point here also is that the people that we read, especially like Solzhenitsyn and then even reading Kennedy's sermon, there's an analytical logic to it. There's a rhetoric to it. But at the same time, like what I do is after years and years and years of preaching and teaching and talking in public, I just give myself to the words. I allow myself to be taken over by the text. I don't think about how I'm going to talk. I don't think about what I'm saying. It's there. I've already plotted it out. I planned it out. It's there. So I go into a flow state.
What I've received from like my own children is the things that they'll repeat, the phrases or the expressions,
right,
are the things that weren't written,
Mm-hmm.
that come out of that, those moments when you break, not necessarily break from the manuscript, but when you let the words that you've written lead you into the next place.
Well, and think about this too, right? That we grew up at a time when catchphrases was all the rage. Like "eat my shorts, man," and "where's the beef," and like that was really advertising in a nutshell. You have to have a tag, so that people will repeat it over and over again.
The best part of waking up.
Right, exactly. And you don't see that really anymore. Like it's not a thing. We talked about that with like jingles. Like in the 80s and 90s, the commercial jingle, like I can still sing hundreds.
Well,
if not
now you're
thousands of
edgy
commercial
if you've
jingles.
got a jingle.
Right.
Because nobody has those silly jingles. So if you have one, then you can. Yeah.
Right.
Huh.
Or even Tin Pan Alley. The songwriters for Tin Pan Alley, like Carole King and Neil Diamond, were the two, really famous people that came out of that. Was like, we're going to put you in a room and you're going to write songs, and the songs have to have a hook. Go. I think Paul Anka was there too, and Sadaka. I think they were all part of that. Anyways, the problem when you try and manufacture a catchphrase or you try and manufacture a response from people is it might work a couple times, but eventually, like with the mainstream media, people are like, "Oh, you're doing that thing again." It's like we talk about with pastors that cry in every sermon.
Oh yeah.
At a certain point, you're like, "Dude, you need to get counseling. Obviously, there's something that's happening under the surface here, and you're not dealing with it." But kind of like we're in a hostage situation at this point. So at that point, speaking of hostage situations, Alexander Solzhenitsyn.
And our 9 listeners, watchers. Oh, before we do that though, we did say before we went on air that we want to encourage you to let our friends at 1517 who sponsor this show, let them know what you think of the show. Only positive. And you can send an email. I don't know what it is. Something at 1517, probably contact at 1517.org. Something like that.
Specifically, when you write about the show and say how much you enjoy the show, be specific about, do you enjoy us talking about the 2 kingdoms and the 3 estates? Do you enjoy us talking about how Christians are to engage and interface with society today? And talk about mainstream media and the virus of unknown origins and the coup that was recently enacted. These kinds of things. Do you want us to talk about this? And also historically speaking, and like reading Solzhenitsyn and other historical, may not be straight line theologians like Capon or John of Damascus or Martin Luther, and yet they do have something to say to us as regards, again, the overlap and maybe even the obliteration of the 2 kingdoms by the state, usually.
Probably the best way to...
in the context of Christendom. The church tries to obliterate the state within Christendom.
Yeah, well, that's that was right at the beginning. When we started the show, we did, 14 episodes on, tell me, whose book?
C.S. Lewis, Robert Capon.
Capon, right? On Christendom.
Oh, Astonished at Heart.
Right, which really did deal quite a bit with church and state and the way that the church became like the state religion, and then the negatives that were the consequence of that.
Right.
So, best way to do it, I think, actually, rather than send an email, is go to 1517.org/give. And then in your note that's attached to your donation, one, it's for Thanksgiving for this show, Banned Books, and here's what I appreciate about the show.
Right, just
put it in your note.
What's this check for? Only for Banned Books podcast. We're only here for the podcast.
Oh, there's plenty of other things that you can support there. The what was the other point we were going to make?
By Chad's book. I'm sure there's at least 5 people left that haven't bought Unveiling Mercy. Do that.
Yeah, I do the podcast version. Somebody wrote us this morning and said, "The world is going mad. Thank you," and Donovan, it was written to me, "for Banned Books. You guys are educating me in a Christian worldview I've never had." I really appreciate both you guys and what God has called you to do.
Let's just go there. Okay, so here's the thing.
Well, it's true though, right?
No, I think, in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, and it's just anecdotal because it's based on my experience, the church has taken a quietistic stance in regards to society.
Is it? It's not because we don't have anything to say.
I think we want to maintain the status quo because
we don't want to
so
say
comfortable.
Okay.
And I think what happens then is when individual congregations, local congregations do become quote unquote political, it's straight line. Well, we're conservative, so we're going to preach the Republican libertarian side or the Democratic liberal side.
Right.
And there's not, and this is our point, is if you read the prophets, they're like Archie Bunker. Right? They hate everybody.
That's a dated reference, man.
Dude, if you don't know All in the Family, go on YouTube and watch one of the greatest shows ever. I mean, hands down, the first 3 seasons of All in the Family it's brilliant. It's genius, right?
Mm-hmm.
The writing is fantastic. And this is the point, is that the reason that All in the Family works is because they attack everybody. They critique everybody, not just one side, but all sides equally. And likewise then, when the prophets attack the king, or they attack the king's appointed prophets, or the priests, or they attack the merchant class, or they attack the people, they attack everybody, right? That's the thing. Thanks, Brandon. And for us anyways, I think, we've talked about this, right? That you and I would be labeled conservative because we're against abortion.
Yeah. Generally speaking, pro-life.
But I don't
right?
think that,
Yeah.
but I don't think you and I think of pro-life versus pro-choice as a political stance. It's
an ethical stance.
right. It's moral.
It's what I sent you yesterday, that little clip from Jordan Peterson, where he was talking about
You
a
got it,
function,
Tom. Or South Park. Yeah.
like a functioning society requires not power,
Mhm.
but ethics and
Correct.
ethos, right? And you think about what is
That's the key point, though. Before you go any further, I think that's the key point, is that the church has no ethos, right? The other podcast I do is entirely dedicated to one thing, the warrior ethos.
right.
That's the entire, the text, the subtext, and everything about the podcast is, I can't find an ethos, so I'm just going to make a podcast so I can discuss it with other people that share that ethos.
Well, but I would say that we approach, at least our pastoral ministry, historically, we've approached that as being an ethical, not dilemma, but an ethical way. It's a way of life. So it's the liturgy, prayer, sacrament, of course, both
Right.
baptism, Lord's Supper, hymnity. I mean, this is
But that's
the
still
way
an
that
ethos.
we live.
That in and of itself is an ethos.
Yeah, right. But what we've been trying to do with the show is to say, well, that's not limited to an hour plus or minus on Sunday morning, or even like daily prayer.
Right.
Those that's the grounding, but for your rest of your life with Christ in this world. And if you have no approach to that, if it's just like, well, what's good for you is good for me, or not good for me, or whatever it is, you're kind of, well, I think you either resign yourself to just say, I'm not in control of this situation, which is probably true anyway, when it comes to worldview,
100%.
or you just pick a side, I guess, right, and say, well, I'm going to live according to this,
Right.
political, ethical standard, or you just be like what we are, which is, I guess, more chaotic or anarchic, where we're like, I don't want you to put me in a box.
Right.
I have an ethical, framework that's guided by first my faith and second by my reason, subsidiarily, and that's not going to fit within any of the patterns or programs you want to put me in.
Right. Because we're all sinful and selfish, and therefore any institution, by virtue of the fact that it's populated by people, is going to become monstrous at a certain point and seek to devour you individually. So there's no perfect system. There's no perfect institution. There's no perfect group.
Well, you find out that they'll use, especially moral, ethical standards, whether left or right, it doesn't matter. You mentioned abortion on the right. On the left, it would be, don't you care about poor people, something like that, or the environment, or whatever your ethical principle is, and it ends up just being a way of just redistributing power and wealth.
Right.
Behind the scenes, it doesn't. Neither of them really benefit you overtly or any kind of practical way.
Right. To use an analogy, we buy lots of board games. My kids are into board games. I like board games. German board games like Carcassonne and Settlers of Catan, that kind of stuff.
Right.
When you open the game, it comes with instructions, and you just read the instructions.
Then
But
you
have
presume
ever
to use
just
them?
Stepped back. Well, my son, my oldest, has always simply, what do you want to say? He has, what's the word? What do you call it? Revisionist. He's a revisionist when it comes to the rules.
House rules instead of
Right. There's the
The
house
book.
rules, especially when my daughter, who's now 14, she's 3 years younger than him. So he was always revising the rules to the game. And my daughter, until she learned how to read, was like, oh, okay, I guess those are the rules. And then when she learned how to read, she's like, wait a minute. And then all of a sudden, Alma, my daughter, became the rule reader because my son never read the rules out loud. He just said, this is what the rules say. Then my daughter's like, we're reading these out loud from now on, and Owen is not allowed to discuss the rules.
So
she became the
Hoyle
lawyer.
is kind of totalitarian, right?
That's what I'm saying, is that we don't consider necessarily, because you're right, the rules come with the game, and we read the rules and we follow the rules and play the game. What we never take into consideration is somebody wrote those and put them in the box and predetermined this is how you're going to play the game.
And likely for their own benefit.
For their own benefit. You take a game like Carcassonne where you build the board as you go, right? They're little squares and then you build the board. Even that has an internal rule set to it though, because you can't put grass with water and you can't put water with rock. You have to build a castle and it has to have sides and you have to make fields and rivers, but they can't intersect. There's rules. There's internal logics to the game that were predetermined by the creator of the game. Every system, every ideological system, political, philosophical, or theological, comes with a predetermined set of rules that were written for you by somebody else before you got there. And therefore, you either play by the rules of the game or you don't play the game because you don't get to rewrite the rules. I mean, you can go off and start your own commune or your own, support group or your own church, and then you get to write the rules yourself. We call those things cults.
Right.
Because they become a cult of personality or a cult of morality or a apocalyptic cult. But still, somebody said, I'm going to start an apocalyptic cult. Here's the rules.
Right. Cooperate to graduate.
Exactly. Yeah. So then when it comes to Solzhenitsyn, for example, since we're going to read him today, the rules were written before he showed up on the scene.
Yeah, because he's late 20th century.
And early on, as he notes in Gulag Archipelago, I was down with the rules. I played the game, so to speak, right? It's like Manson says, not Charles, but Mark, in The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F, which is, it's good to know the rules of the game, right? To play the game. It's great to win, but it's better to not play at all. The reason that so many people are so anxious all the time and so stressed out all the time is because they're playing the game by the rules that were set by other people for them. And there's no better way to test this out than to quit playing the game and see how the people who are still playing the game react to you quitting.
You mean buy up lots of shorted stock and hold instead of selling?
Exactly. I kind of feel like cults are playtesting. It's like, it's like we have all these playtesters and we're going to give them the game and see if they can break the game. That's the cult in a nutshell. We're going to see if they can break the game.
Yeah, and the word today to describe all these social interactions is game theory.
Exactly.
Right. So, and it sounds like, oh, life is a game. That's not exactly what it's getting after. It's just saying that there's always upside downside to every human interaction, and it applies,
transactional gamesmanship.
Well, sometimes transactional, but there's like so many different kinds of games, right? There's zero sum games. There's asymptomatic, what do you call it? Asymmetry, right?
Yeah, asymmetrical.
Asymmetrical. There's cooperative ones. There's ones where you don't play.
Right.
But there's different ways to describe it. But
fan of parallel play.
Parallel play.
I play online, but I don't talk to people.
So there's some good YouTube videos. I'm not going to search for it now because you'll hear the audio. But just kind of break down just how broad game theory is, and now it's being applied to everything, especially economics.
Yeah.
And that's what the GameStop people understood, I think, is that there was a game being played and the rules were set to benefit a particular group of people.
Right.
And if enough people would go play with a different set of rules, they might be able to break the game.
Right.
So like when we started broadcasting, there was a game being played and now it's, looking here at the stock price, it's changed dramatically. Just it was down 100 something, now it's down 60. So from where it was at the start.
People who write
of
the
show.
rules were informed that, hey, we're trying to break the game.
Yeah, you got to do something about it.
Right.
Yeah, so the next couple of days are going to get interesting.
Because we've got our 401ks invested in this.
A lot of people
I don't mean like yours. No one cares about you. I mean the billionaires.
Right. Well, and I told you the other quantity that I read in an article that was trying to convince these Reddit traders to sell their stocks and get out of the game was that the government pensions are highly shorted. Though they have shorted stock. And so if the government pensions are going belly up, then you're going to get government intervention. I'm like, yep.
Yeah. No, they had a closed door meeting in the Senate last week.
Yep.
Because the senators wanted to know if their stocks were being threatened, which, by the way, is illegal.
No, it's not for senators, by the way.
It's not illegal to do that?
No.
As long as they say, hey, we're doing this, we're just not going to let anybody.
No, it's the insider trading rules don't apply to Congress.
Of course they don't. of course.
You didn't know that? No.
I did not.
That's why, like, Pelosi bought $1.25 million
Oh, that's
worth of
right.
Tesla shares.
Yeah.
Just the day before they signed the EO, saying the government's going to buy all electric vehicles.
Yeah, there you go.
And Tesla being the majority manufacturer makes perfect sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Where do you think they make their money?
Mm-hmm.
It's not. No, they don't. It's not considered insider trading for Congress. They're exempt from that.
Moving on. And
Happy
we're
days.
walking. And we're walking.
Yes.
So Solzhenitsyn, 1974, he penned this essay entitled "Live Not by Lies." It circulated among Moscow's intellectuals at the time, and it is dated February 12th, the same day that secret police broke into his apartment and arrested him. The next day, he was exiled to West Germany. The essay is a call to moral courage and serves as light to all who value truth, which circles back around to what we were talking about with ethos.
Mm-hmm.
In order to have moral courage, you actually have to have a set of morals.
Right. And I guess the question that has
objective morals.
The question that's been posed to us is, what does this have to do with the gospel of Jesus Christ?
We're going to get there.
Yeah. And I think that's the question we have to ask, is to say, how does our moral, ethical interaction with this world, how does that either positively or negatively affect our preaching of the gospel?
Right. Well, the quick and dirty is, because I was getting ready for catechism this Sunday with confession and absolution, is once we confess our sins, which is held up to us in light of the Ten Commandments and how impossible it is for us to actually do them, is that in confession, we not only examine ourselves according to the Ten Commandments, but we examine our callings in life and our vocations in relation to the Ten Commandments, and therefore recognize not only our personal sin, but the sin of the world and other people. And then we receive absolution, the forgiveness of sins in Jesus' name, which then sets us free to go out and engage and interface with people in the world.
And
thus,
albeit imperfectly.
According to the Ten Commandments, which we sometimes refer to as natural law.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The commandments being, what does Paul call them? A steward or a tutor?
Pedagogue.
Yeah. A pedagogue to show us, and it was originally at Sinai, it was to show Israel what they had forgotten about themselves and their interaction with this world.
Right. Which is then interesting or ironic, depending on how you frame it, that people want us to only talk about Jesus because they don't want to be reminded that the
they
reason
need
they
Jesus.
need Jesus is the backspin of the gospel is you have sins that need to be forgiven that he died for. I do use my Telegram account. I think Gillespie uses his too.
And there is a Telegram channel for Banned Books. It's t.me/bannedbooks1517. So you can go chat in the channel to your heart's content. So I would rather put it there than an email or some other nonsense platform.
So as we've discussed in the past, then there's actually no such thing as freedom apart from belief in God, because even the Constitution writers assume that freedom comes from God. It's a right that is given to us.
Unalienable.
Likewise, inalienable, right? Likewise, morality, at least up until very recently, was assumed to be an objective reality. And therefore, natural law then, which frames our morality, alerts us to the fact that A, there's a God and a creator who ordered the universe in such a way that this is how it's supposed to run. And then on account of original sin, this is how we try and break the game. And that's why we confess. Not because God needs us to confess constantly, but because we constantly don't trust that he has forgiven us for breaking the law, not cherishing and adoring his law, his will. And therefore, that's our need for Jesus. That's why we talk about, for you and I, when we teach catechism, that you must read the commandments in two ways, not one way.
That's right.
Prescriptive and descriptive.
Yeah.
The prescription is, if you do this, you'll live, and if you don't do this, you'll die. Descriptively, this is what Jesus did to perfectly keep and fulfill the commandments for you, so that you might live in freedom from guilt and anxiety about, okay, I didn't obey the law this week. I broke the fourth commandment. I disrespected my parents, or I disrespected the authority. Father, forgive me. And his answer is, well, of course I forgive you, because Jesus died for that too.
Right.
With no objective moral measure, without any ethos by which to order our days and our lives, Jesus quickly starts to fade away into the background.
Well, and
Instead of talking about sin, we talk about mistakes, we talk about bad habits.
yeah, just kind of generic moral failings or something like that.
Yeah.
Think about those churches that don't interact with the world. They also, these are the more communal, isolated ones. They also don't preach the gospel, because what do they need to be forgiven for?
Exactly.
I'm thinking more of what the Anabaptists would be a good example, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where they live in isolation, Mennonites, Mennonites, whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
There is something to be said, like you want to keep your hands clean.
Mm-hmm.
I get that. And yet Jesus calls us into the world.
Right.
And what tool do we have in the world to not only diagnose the condition, to speak the truth in love? What's the truth that they need? Your sins are forgiven? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is, as soon as you say that to someone, not like it's okay and everything's going to be fine, but your sins are forgiven.
Right.
You've revealed to them that you have a view of both yourself and of the rest of this world, that it is inherently broken, sinful.
I was going to say, to Brandon's point, the problem that I have with the word brokenness and the use of brokenness is that word in the present context is framed within therapeutic and psychoanalytical language.
Correct. Yeah.
20th century in particular. Nowhere in the Bible is that word broken used to describe sin and forgiveness.
Actually, the Bible uses more severe language, something like you've played the whore.
Death and resurrection. Right, you played the whore. Yeah, you're a whore. And we can't use that language, of course, because that hurts our self-esteem. Again, therapeutic language.
Or your children's blood is poured out on the ground from your sacrificing them to idols.
Yeah. So
that's not brokenness.
Right, it's not brokenness, and Jesus doesn't fix us. That's the problem with therapeutic language. That's the problem with uncritically assuming language and using language that it sounds good, it's comforting, but it's not biblical. Not to say that it's not useful. I just don't think it is anymore, because it's therapeutic and it assumes that we can be fixed. And the problem is we're not fixable because we're dead. And we don't need to be fixed. We need to be raised from the dead and given new life. That's why Paul always uses the language of old Adam and new man in Christ. We don't need to be fixed. We need to be made completely new. My heart isn't broken. My heart is stone. And I need a heart of flesh. Well, you can't actually change stone to flesh. That's impossible. But Jesus does. That's why he's God. And yes, brokenness does imply victimhood. And it actually casts us within a moral framework that we're the victims of ourselves, victims of our family, victims of circumstance, society. And I, for one, am staunchly anti-victimhood, unless you are an actual victim.
Well, it's not to say you haven't been both on the giving and receiving end of that.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the point, though, is at one time in my life, I was abused, but I'm not being abused anymore, and I'm not an abuser. So why think of myself as an abuse victim when I'm no longer being abused? I'm no longer being victimized.
Well, there is that idea of control and that illusion of control.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is also undergirding that.
Right.
What is it from AA, right? Oh, not AA. I'm thinking of, is it Niemöller? Who's the prayer? The Serenity Prayer.
Is that Martin Niemöller?
I think it
It's one
is.
of those things where you're like, oh yeah, it was him, and then you forget it.
Well, somebody posted the full prayer. There's apparently a whole part that nobody knows by heart.
Well, it's because in AA you don't want to. The rest of it's so Christian that it kind of.
Oh, it's Niebuhr.
Reinhold Niebuhr, right?
Yeah, the second part is
H. Richard Niebuhr.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? No, it's Reinhold.
Reinhold. Okay, I should.
Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as a pathway to peace, taking as Jesus did the sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that you will make meaning Jesus, will make all things right if I surrender to your will, so that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with you forever in the next. Yeah, I know.
Additional language.
Yes, I know. I knew you'd love that part.
Yeah. No, I know it from AA, but I also understand why AA chopped off most of the rest of it.
They cut off the rest of it?
Yeah. Well, you have to in AA because it's not a Christian organization.
It was.
Explicitly. Well, right. The Oxford movement, the Oxford School, was basically started by the Methodist and a German Pietist, and then that became AA eventually.
Yeah, somewhere I remember reading the original manual, which was much more explicit.
Much more, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's like nobody wants to discuss that Bill W. credits LSD to his sobriety.
Oops.
Yeah, we don't want to talk
Not
about
microdosing either.
No. Heroic. Timothy Leary, Ken Kesey, heroic doses, right? And so this is our point going into Solzhenitsyn then, is that if we address the world as broken, it assumes it can be fixed. And then we have to figure out who or how many of us need to fix it, right? So think of more concretely, my congregation is broken. Let's say somebody says that, my congregation is functionally broken because we have these different factions within our church, and my pastor has chosen, that family side, and it's just broken. Well, that assumes that Jesus or God or somebody needs to fix your church.
Or there's a congregation that isn't inherently
or there's
have
a congregation that achieved the Platonic ideal, versus your congregation isn't broken, it's dead. It's a cemetery because the gospel is not being preached. Because the gospel is the power of God unto salvation to those who believe. And therefore, what the gospel does is it puts to death the old Adam sinner that wants to create factions and play power games and transactional games within the congregation. It puts that to death and raises up new men and women in place of the old Adam to live before God, or to live with Jesus in righteousness, innocence, and blessedness forever.
Yeah.
And that is then the struggle of every congregation, is to live in that simul, that I am 100% in the flesh a sinner. I'm never not going to be. I'm not broken.
Right.
I'm sinful. I'm dead. I'm a rebel against God and
I was going to
creation.
say it's definitely both things at the same time.
Right. To suggest that we're broken is to suggest that, again, I can be fixed. So then I just need to figure out, well, how do I fix myself? Well, I'm sure there's a list for that.
Right.
Or a how-to guide. And then your pastor becomes that guy
Yeah.
who stands in the pulpit and tells you this week how to fix your life.
Isn't it much like we've talked about with socialism, is that we're always trying to live in or strive for this utopian ideal apart from Jesus.
Correct.
To accomplish the kingdom of God on earth, which one is, well, it's just faulty premise in the first place that you could ever do such a thing, or that Jesus would even want to.
It's catastrophically naive, as has been proven by the hundreds of millions of people who have been executed in the name of socialism and Marxism and communism.
Yeah, and it's entirely opposed to the biblical witness of both current time and end time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. So that being said, then Solzhenitsyn download program early on in his life.
Oh, by the way, before you keep going, did you pause your Dropbox?
Oh yeah, there we go.
That might help out about the glitchies.
Kidding. How about 1 hour? There we go.
That should work.
Yeah, you kind of started to blur out there. The 10 Commandments aren't that difficult to follow. They're not if you completely ignore the consequence.
Or the severity that Jesus puts on them in the Sermon on the Mount.
There's nothing wrong with eating refined sugar all day, every day, as long as you don't pay attention to the consequences. So at one time, Solzhenitsyn writes, so again, he was arrested the day he wrote this. At one time, we dared not even to whisper. Now we write and read samizdat. There we go. And sometimes when we gather in the smoking room at the Science Institute, oh, those were the days.
The smoking room. Yeah.
I was going to say, as long as you don't pay attention to the consequences of cigarette smoking.
Speaking of worldview.
Honestly, I do actually miss smoking cigarettes every once in a while, just for that reason. Just to be young and naive.
Just drink your coffee. It's not the
drinking
same.
Tea, actually, because I have to.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
I have to do that whole pathology of my stone, so I've got to, What kind of tricks are they playing on us? And where are they dragging us? By the way, if you have a law preacher in your congregation, that should be the question. That's the line of reasoning you should be following. What kind of tricks is the preacher playing on us, and where is he dragging us?
Mm-hmm.
Gratuitous boasting of cosmic achievements while there is poverty and destruction at home. Propping up remote, uncivilized what?
Oh, yeah, because they flew to space.
Right. Okay. I thought I skipped something.
No. He meant cosmic. I was struggling with cosmic achievement. What is he talking about? No, yeah, we went to space.
Yeah. Theoretically, propping up remote, uncivilized regimes, fanning up civil war, and we recklessly fostered Mao Zedong at our expense. And it will be we who are sent to war against him, and will have to go. Is there any way out? And they put on trial anybody they want, sane people in asylums. Always they, and we are powerless. Just a reminder, this was written in 1974, and it has no application whatsoever in the present context.
No, but I do.
Sermon from 1960.
I do think it echoes, and the reason I wanted to read it is I think it echoes the sentiment that at least I've seen on social, from Christians is like, well, what do we do? Because we have nothing.
Right.
We don't have media, we don't have the courts, we don't have the legislature, we don't have the presidency,
Right.
we don't have local government, we don't have state government. Well, that's not exactly true. Well, depends. By we, what I mean by we is rational thinking people. I don't care about what party they're
Correct.
in. As we've seen, it's like a rational thinking person would say, this person has come forward and is making accusations.
Correct.
It's reasonable for us, because of the severity of the accusations, to either completely disqualify this person or but to do that through investigation. That's a reasonable thing to do.
Right.
But instead it's like, no, look the other way.
Fraud. I'm the guy who hacked the voting.
You can't say the words, now we're going to get banned.
I didn't say the person. I didn't say the company.
You can't. We're not referring to a particular election.
I'm referring to Venezuela.
Oh yeah, there you go.
What are you talking about?
I'm referring to the last 20 years of elections in our country, at least.
I'm not aware.
You're not aware? Okay.
What you refer to? No.
But the point is like that would be
I have to make a phone call real quick.
a thinking reasonable thing to do, right? Is to ask those questions, or to say, well, what's the implication of saying we're going to move away from fossil fuels in the U.S., but the people who are advocating for moving away from fossil fuels have huge fossil fuel interests in foreign countries, like say Ukraine.
Correct. Right.
Like, now wait a minute. Wait a minute. Your family stands to benefit a lot if we import rather than export. So that's what I said. Was it before we went on air or whatnot? No, it was when we went on air, right? It's just a shifting of who is in control of the reins of the financial institutions.
It's just a question of which countries are we going to launder the money through?
Yeah, and who gets to be the ones in charge? Who sets the rules?
And so they sit around, they smoke their cigarettes, and I think this is key too. And in Solzhenitsyn, again, in the Gulag Archipelago, he discusses this: is that to paraphrase him, is the problem with intellectuals and academics is they live in the realm of the abstract, and therefore there's really no concrete consequences for the things that they discuss, they debate. And then when there are, they are not equipped to do anything about it because they don't know what to do. It's like I went back and was looking at the Frankfurt School of Critical Social Theory again, and how these Jewish neo-Marxists, which just fascinating, thought that if they just educated the German people about Hitler and the socialists, the people would revolt. And then, of course, they didn't, and they had to flee. And it made many of them extremely bitter then for the rest of their lives, because intellectually they had made up their minds, this is the ideal path forward. This is how we are going to teach the German people about the evils of Hitler and National Socialism. And once they understand, and having been in academics for a really, really long time, I can speak to this, is you get this idea in your mind. This is the way forward. This is why I say idealists make the best dictators. And so you just think, if I can just get everybody else to conform to this picture in my mind, this idea that I have in my mind, if everybody can just conform, that's why classrooms are so dangerous when the professor or teacher is irresponsible and unethical or immoral, because they don't take into consideration the people that are learning from them, that are sitting in these desks. They're going to go out in the world and actually implement this in real time.
Right.
And
and they want
the consequences, but they will.
Right. Isn't the move to have younger voting age now? As young as 16?
Yes. 16, yeah.
So we have kids that are in school being indoctrinated, then turning around and voting.
Right. It's Animal Farm. It's Napoleon with the dogs.
Oh, yeah, I suppose. Or Lord of the Flies, right? Where they vote them off the island, so to speak.
Exactly. So yes, intellectually, you can sit around and debate the evils, the pros and the cons, the evil and the morality of the Soviet socialist state.
Right.
Because you're not in a gulag. Then you go to a gulag. And then suddenly, as Solzhenitsyn, he had that, okay. It's like Dostoevsky when they lined him up against the wall and they were going to, maybe or maybe not execute him.
Right.
And then all of a sudden he's like, there's consequences for the things that I say and write.
Well, and I would put it this way too. in my interaction with people in regards to the last national election, there was the idea that if we vote for this guy, everything's going to go great. And if we vote for that guy, everything is going to go terribly. And depending on which side you wanted to pick. And I'm looking at it and like, I'm doing a risk assessment here. And I'm saying, okay, this person both people have a mix of terrible and good policies, right? And ultimately, the kind of president that I want, this is just my personal opinion, is one that does the least.
Correct.
Not because I believe that humanity is inherently good, and if we just take the shackles off, then everybody's going to behave really well. Although there are plenty of examples actually where, like the beginning of eBay is an example of this, where it was assumed that if there was no what do you call it? Somebody that goes in between, a broker or
mediator,
some kind of mediator. If people are just saying, I have this product and you have money, you send me money, I have the product, I'll send you the product.
It'll never work.
It'll never work because both sides are going to want to defraud each other. There's too much possible. And it turns out that actually it worked really well until there was a point where they needed some kind of social score attached to it.
Yeah.
To try to help you weed out the bad actors.
Right.
Once they caught it, you got their attention. But ultimately, the least amount of arbitrary rules possible. That'd be my own personal approach.
Right.
Yeah. But that also then it operates from a worldview that I have and that we have as Christians, is that it's harder for us now that we have come to faith to understand people who are inherently immoral because they have no faith in Christ. They have no, they don't have the Spirit. They don't know God's word, and they deny their own humanity, which is the worst, right?
Right.
They denied only their own humanity, but the humanity of others. Right. At that point, you're dealing with the strange thing that's in the Old Testament that I wanted to tell you about because I had never really bumped into this. I think it's Deuteronomy 32. There's this weird statement about how the kings, that the Lord set demons in the seat of kings in these foreign nations. And you're like, wait a minute.
Right.
Like, honest to goodness, demonic rulers? Like, or were they possessed or what was going on there? It's a very, and there's some Psalms that have similar statements. Like, this is the thing that we don't want to believe, is that there are...
We don't want to talk about it in church.
Right, that there are people who have, whether they know it or not, have given themselves over to the demonic, to the satanic. They're
right. We usually call them celebrities.
I didn't know that's why Frank Zappa got canceled. He was one of the first people to get canceled. He got canceled for exposing the pedo ring in Hollywood.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was like, that was a long time ago.
It was.
And he got burnt bad for doing that. I did not know that.
Yeah.
But regardless, my point is it's also people in leadership,
Right.
And how does it work? It's the old demonic approach, right? You outwardly you present a really positive, virtuous kind of approach. Did God really say, it looks good, doesn't it? Yeah, it's good.
I just listened again to a lecture by Alan Watts from, I think it was the early 70s maybe, about fake virtue. And he's talking about it in relation to politics, celebrity, and academia. And this is a guy who's a former Episcopal priest, I think.
He was.
A Buddhist.
And then he came back.
He became a Buddhist.
Yeah.
That's his biography is fascinating, by the way. Just an entire lineage of self-justification.
And there's also drugs involved there.
Maybe. It was the 60s. Don't judge. You weren't there, buddy. But the point with Watts is that he points out there's virtue signaling in every generation. It's just the media and how it gets out changes. So you have like the suffrages in the 20s, for example, or teens.
Suffragette
City. And which by choose a better title because it sounds way too much like suffering. It was bad branding is what it is, right? Bad marketing. Are you for women's suffrage? No, man, I don't want them to suffer. What's wrong? But you have that with then not the abstinence movement, but no drinking. What's that called? That was
Prohibition?
Prohibition movement, right? That came about at about the same time. It's virtue signaling because we found out after the fact, like you said, with Pelosi and the stocks, many of these people were running illegal speakeasies while also passing legislation prohibiting because they were benefiting from the sale of alcohol.
Right.
And so all Watts is saying, and I'm applying it to this too, is virtue signaling is always there. As long as there's been virtue signaling. But it's like I said to you the other day, and I was talking with my wife about this, is that if I said to my congregation, for example, what does the face of evil look like? You wouldn't say, well, it's a short guy from Brooklyn who has been called in to act as an expert on AIDS and malaria and COVID. And yet in 30 or 40 years, there's a person that's responsible for more deaths than any Nazi scientist.
Right. No, it's true.
You know, and yet because our government says, no, he's an expert, listen to this guy. People are like, well, he is an expert. He would know.
I posted the video that, as Paul's mentioning here in the chat.
Yeah, 100%. Paul.
From Get
writes,
Sad.
Yep.
But this is the elite ruling class assuage their existential guilt, how they do it. It's interesting because it was originally about, when Gad first had the article that he wrote, it was about celebrities. Mm-hmm. But now he recognizes that it's all the ruling class.
Well, God has, Gadsad or Godsad. He has a background, I think.
It's Gadsad. That's how he pronounces
Gadsad.
it.
He's got antenna there tuned. But at the same time, I still think he's got to come further away from the intellectual and more into the concrete.
I don't know. I
think he's there.
I think he's working at it. He's working at it between Twitter and these little video shorts. Just trying to get there. Well, part of it too is that he has the same problem that I think a lot of Christians have, is that he tries to maintain enough distance, having gone through the Lebanese, oppression of the Jews. I mean, he's experienced it, and so he's trying to help things out without being overtly politically active.
Right.
But that's challenging. Because
I was going to say, there's not, unfortunately, because this is, of course, what a lot of people behind the scenes want, which is us to be divided and ultimately fragmented, is it's kind of hard to play the middle ground right now.
Yeah. Well, and you can't, which sides do you...
Neutral.
Well, you can't really pick a side. I think that's ultimately the problem.
Which is where we started, which is, if you're going to speak with the voice of the prophet, there's only one side, and that's Christ. And think about, that's not Christ must be attacked.
Think about how even like our questioning of the science behind certain COVID responses, like masks, became quickly politicized to being a Republican versus Democrat issue, which is like, is it? Not inherently. It's a science issue. It's like, why would you make it political? Oh, I see. So that you can control people. Yeah.
Right. Because if it was really science, like we discussed with that thread on Twitter last night, science is, like the very nature of science is it to be questioned and challenged and to have a very robust conversation and debate about the evidence and the data.
What? Evidence? Data? Who cares?
Yeah, I know, right? Weird.
Well, the thread you're referring to was Heather Haying, right?
Right. Yeah.
This is Brett Weinstein's. Brett. It's Brett.
That's right. Yeah, Brett.
Yeah, and they have a show called a podcast. It's weekly. It's called Dark Horse. And they've been
What's the name of it? I never paid attention.
Yeah, and they've been questioning why or asking the question, why aren't we entertaining the lab leak thesis? They've been doing this for months, but it was shut down, and now it's back in the open again. So they appeared on Bill Maher, the two of them. Which Bill, I don't always agree with him, but at least he's trying to think, right? Which is good. And they brought it up. They brought up the lab leak thing. And so then she does a whole thread about all the feedback they've gotten, negative feedback. You're like, how dare you? It's not, you can't call it the China virus anymore,
right?
Et cetera, et cetera. And like, we're just asking a simple question. You saw the article that the Chinese press put out?
Yeah.
Where they said it was imported frozen food into the meat market?
Yeah. Didn't they blame Italy originally?
Yeah. Well, they brought that story up again this week. I'm like,
and I said it was leaked from a lab in February or March of last year. Because
I'd like to go
follow the money from America to China by way of Fauci.
Well, and if that's true about Fauci, he's not only like horribly compromised, but we're talking about, you're talking about a gross medical ethical violation. We
have the receipts.
Right, but who's going to prosecute?
Nobody.
Nobody did for what he did with AIDS.
This is catastrophic. Just like with AIDS. It's a catastrophic error.
Well, it's just like Facebook admitted that they made a gross misstep or error in restraining the hydrochloroquine
Yeah.
hydroxychloroquine, excuse me, get
Hydroxychloroquine.
the right chemical.
Yeah, exactly.
Story, yeah, because don't put fishbowl cleaner in your body.
No.
But they made a huge error in restraining it because it's turned out that it actually would have been quite effective early on.
Correct.
Like,
Correct.
okay, you can say that in hindsight, that we regret, but recognize the real human cost of your actions.
Right. Which goes to the point that we were discussing. To clarify, all that we're discussing right now is about moral law.
Mm-hmm.
This is a moral law discussion. This is a natural law discussion. What is right and good for everybody and what is not.
It's so true.
Yes, we are.
It's so true.
And yet we're not even trying. It just happens.
Well, no, and why, right? I mean, ultimately, what we're doing as pastors is we're trying to be self-critical. We're trying to see where our blind spots are by working through some of these issues, these moral issues, so that we don't just assume that we're on the right side of history all the time. But also, I mean, it is a call. There is a call to repentance.
Correct.
And do I ultimately you want somebody like we talked about when we did the Nuremberg trial book. It's like we inherently as Christians, we want those war criminals who did terrible and horrible things to repent and believe the gospel. And it was kind of, I mean,
we want them to be hung.
Well, right, of course.
As people, as men, we want them to be hung. I said that to my friend on Saturday. We were in between sparring. I said, my wife went to Costco and there were dozens of people wearing 3 masks. And I said, as a Christian, I want to love them. I want to show compassion towards them. I want to pray for them. As a man, I hope they die.
Well, they might.
I hope they die.
Bacterial pneumonia.
Because it just cleans out the gene pool. And is that cruel? Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Well, the same person who recommended multiple masks
at this point
said on national television on Sunday night there's no basis in science for that.
Of course there's no
recommendation.
Basis. The same day the World Health Organization said masks aren't effective, this comes out. Fauci's like 3 masks.
Well, this is the thing we've learned from social media.
He said 2 originally.
And I think this applies to the church. Of course it does. What we learned from social media is this, the idea of the dopamine hit, right? And recognizing the biochemical response of making people feel good about what they're doing, right?
Correct.
And so, as people have interacted with us as pastors and saying, well, what can we do, right? How do we interact with this world? What they're looking for is that good feeling.
Yes,
right?
100%.
The hormonal hit. They're not actually looking for the narrow way or the difficult path. No. They're not looking to lose friends and neighbors over the truth.
Right.
Unfortunately. And that's why we're reading people like Solzhenitsyn to say, look, as a Christian, if you don't stand, if you're looking to just be in a comfortable place where Jesus makes you feel all right, everybody.
So are you saying if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything?
Well, what are you actually standing for at all?
Exactly. Because you have no ethos.
You're saying, well, I believe in the gospel. I believe in the forgiveness of sins. Well, what's a sin?
Right.
What's left? Well, it's a sin not to drive an electric car. Why? Right. Because if I drive an electric car, I terrorize those kids in Africa that had to mine all the lithium for my batteries.
All the power for my car is generated by a magical jelly bean field behind Elon Musk.
No, it's unicorn fuel.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. Jelly bean fuel was for the windmills. It's been a while.
Right. So does it make you...
The argument, is it Christ? Is of Christ. Not Christ that is constructed for you or by you to make you comfortable and give you the dopamine hit. We talked about this in Galatians Bible study yesterday morning. It's not Jesus plus therapeutic language. Nice and love are not synonymous. But for generations now, the church has sold love, agape, as be nice to everybody, be tolerant of everybody. That's not love. That's sin. And that's promoting sin then. Versus, like I said that meme, right? Jesus, first guy to crash the market. Or that meme before was, what would Jesus do? Well, he would basically get a whip and he would flip over tables and drive the money changers out of the temple.
You've turned my church into, it was supposed to be a place of forgiveness through the sacrifices, through the prayers, right?
Right. And you've turned it into a convenience store. Where
you sacrifice for me, you've turned it into pagan idolatry.
Right. So one, is it of Christ? And once we've established whether or not it is of Christ as Scripture testifies to Christ, all of Scripture, not just Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, but all of Scripture. Secondly then, is it moral? And by moral, I don't mean a particular philosopher. I mean according to God's law, according to God's will.
Revealed will.
Murdering
Yeah.
children violates God's specific command. And if you're confused, there's a whole book dedicated to this about how human sacrifice is wrong.
Yeah.
Not only is it wrong, he hates those who practice it and promises to destroy their generation.
Remember when we were talking about, before we went on air, talking about the terrible decision to omit the imprecatory psalms?
Mm-hmm. In our hymn,
one of the interesting cycles of psalms is Psalm 105 through 107 in Hebrew, which are these historic psalms.
Yeah.
Where it tells like the history of Israel. Now the interesting one is we're in right now. We're in Psalm 106, also not in the hymnal, and it has this section. They did not destroy the peoples as the Lord commanded them, but they mixed with the nations and learned to do as they did. They served their idols, which became a snare to them. They sacrificed their sons and their daughters to the demons. That's what I was talking about before.
Yeah.
It's not the demons in the idol. It's the rulers are the demons that they're sacrificing their children to.
Correct.
They poured out innocent blood, the blood of their own sons and daughters, whom they sacrificed to the idols of Canaan, and the land was polluted with blood. Thus they became unclean by their acts and played the whore in their deeds.
Right.
So that's the way you describe your sin. And describe the sin. There is a corporate sin, our country.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like, are we being judged? I don't say, are we going to be? Are we being judged, for 1 million children more just in our country being murdered every year, legally?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, do we have blood on our hands as a country? Yeah, we do, of course.
Great point, right? We make this argument over and over. Just because something's legal doesn't mean it's moral.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
But we have to have a basis from which to work in order to distinguish between legality and morality. And we don't. Therefore, we assume if it's legal, it's moral.
Yeah, and my point was, take that psalm, and it's not just given as a like, well, that happened a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, right?
Mm-hmm.
But rather say, well, how does that describe us today?
Right.
Do we
Parenthood's headquarters shaped like a pyramid?
Well,
a Mayan temple.
But even the simple thing like we mixed with the nations and to learn to do as they did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What does that mean? That means that ethically, morally, we've commingled. And that to the point where we're so confused, we can't even say, no, empirically, ethically, absolutely, murder of unborn children is wrong.
Right.
We can't say that.
Period.
And that we're not going to fund it. We're not going to give taxes to people who take those tax dollars to fund it.
Right.
What? Did I just say maybe don't pay your taxes? I might have.
No.
It's going to be it's going to be a question that we have to come up with. Jesus says, pay your taxes. And you're like, did the Roman government, facilitate child murder? It's a question.
Yeah. Yep. Chromosomes don't lie either. So back to Solzhenitsyn, which, by the way, goes to the point of Solzhenitsyn, because that's what really wakes him up to this whole thing of like, but it's legal. And then he gets arrested. He's like, oh, wait a minute. So what happens? Well, we went into space, Yuri Gagarin, and we prop up remote, uncivilized regimes all over the world. We fanned civil war. We recklessly fostered Mao Zedong. All this happened. And then we put the sane people in asylums, right? We call good evil and evil good. So things have almost reached rock bottom. Universal spiritual death has already touched us all, and physical death will soon flare up and consume us both and our children, which is exactly where we're at today, in my opinion. But as before, we still smile in a cowardly way and mumble without tongues tied. Oh my goodness, Lord have mercy. Wow.
Yeah, prescient.
Yeah, this is saved and I haven't read it yet. So for those of you listening, he sent me this link like a week or two ago and I haven't read it yet. So I'm reading this with you for the first time.
We talked about it on the show and I said we should read it on the show.
That's bonkers. Wow.
We mumble like, oh, but I got free healthcare.
Right. Yeah, it's not free. Let me read that again then. Things have almost reached rock bottom. A universal spiritual death has already touched us all, and physical death will soon flare up and consume us both and our children. But as before, we still smile in a cowardly way and mumble without tongues tied. But what can we do to stop it? We haven't the strength.
Question mark?
We have been so hopelessly dehumanized That for today's modest ration of food, we are willing to abandon all our principles, our
Mm.
souls, and all the efforts of our predecessors, and all opportunities for our descendants, but just don't disturb our fragile existence. We lack staunchness, pride, and enthusiasm. We don't even fear universal nuclear death.
Hmm.
We don't fear a third world war. We have already taken refuge in the crevices. We just fear acts of civil courage. Wow. Oh my goodness.
Right. Now, he's writing as a Christian. I think this is one of the things that we want to emphasize. And actually a Bible-believing Christian. Right? I mean, he was Orthodox.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Right. So what are we fearing? We fear the wrong things. And I was watching a television program last night that tried to make light of psyops. It was used as a plot element about how psyops are used to distract you from reality, which is helpful actually, because even though it was trying to make fun of how everything's not a psyop, on the other hand, it's like, but you did define psyop precisely, right? Which is it's meant to distract you from what actually was happening, right? So, for example, our Capitol now is surrounded by a 10-foot fence and armed soldiers, right? Yeah. So what? And then there's razor wire. What are you supposed to think about that?
What are the optics, right?
Yeah. I mean, what are they trying to communicate? Because as of yet, no one, not from Congress, not in the intelligence community, no one has actually said, here's the credible threat.
Mm-hmm.
It's just this ephemeral potential.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
Brandon makes a point, we fear suffering. And I would go even deeper with that thought. We fear freedom. And because suffering is a natural byproduct of freedom.
Oh, that you make mistakes?
Yeah. That we are by nature, driven to be slaves. The old Adam wants to be enslaved. That's why Bob Dylan's saying, you got to serve someone. You got to serve somebody. We all got to serve somebody. That's why Luther says in the Catechism, a God is whatever you fear most more than anything.
When I saw Bob Dylan live, I bought a T-shirt. I had no idea what the statement meant on the shirt. I wore it to death.
Nice.
It said, "Don't follow leaders, just watch the parking meters."
Yeah.
And you're
I
like,
to my son this morning. He's like, "Well, how do I know if the banks are truly in trouble, or how do I know if Wall Street crashes?" I said, "Watch the price of gas."
Yeah, it's up 50 cents since the inauguration, right?
Yeah,
or so.
Guess we don't like cheap gas. But think about that, right? That we smile in a cowardly way and mumble without our tongues tied. But what can we do to stop it?
GameStop is currently down 66 from opening, $66 per share. So it's bouncing back. Just hold
the lever and play the
hold
game.
the line. Hold the line.
We fear acts of civil courage because we fear the repercussions. And the reason we fear the repercussions is because at heart, we actually desperately want to be enslaved. We want responsibility and consequences removed from us. This is why I talked in Galatians Bible study to the class. I said, there's only one thing that you hate more than anything else when you come to me for pastoral counseling, is that I refuse to help you.
Right. Or that
I say it.
That you give them permission to do something.
Correct. It's like, I need your help. I can't help you. I was hoping you could help me fix this. I can't. Literally, I cannot do that. I do not have the power to do that. Only God does.
You can diagnose it.
I can diagnose it.
Which might help.
I can say, read Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink, but I cannot fix it. And it's always that, right? It's like, my marriage is broken. Fix it. I'm like, there's that language of brokenness again. Your marriage isn't broken.
Right.
It's dead. It's on life support.
Yeah. By the time they come to you, yeah.
Right. No, by the time they come to me, it's pretty much like, well, if we unplug him, he's dead.
They just want your permission to finally pull the plug. Yeah.
Correct. Right. And so I do. Yep. Yeah. My help is I hear what you're saying. And if I hear you correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, I hear this is what your gut's telling you to do. Like, you've already made up your mind. You're just coming to me for affirmation one way or the other. And I can't do that for you. I can't affirm or deny what you are already feeling or thinking or about to do. But if you want to confess this, and that's what you're doing, I can absolve you.
Right.
Say you are now free in Christ to sin boldly, because there is, to take that example of a marriage, there is no good outcome, because both directions that you go are going to cause suffering and heartbreak. One leads to a marriage that perhaps is stronger and grows from this. The other one is the disintegration and the implosion of the marriage,
Right.
and the consequences. But either way you're looking at it, you're looking at 5 to 10 years of suffering and hardship and struggle.
Right.
And
But
I can't be there for you. I can't carry you. I can't marry you. I can't give you a guide to fix this.
Here's the thing, though. In their confession, they're acknowledging what they know to be true.
Correct.
They're acknowledging the moral framework that's written upon their heart that God has revealed to them in His Word. Right.
Right.
So it's not as if you don't know how to act, but like he says, we fear acting on what we know, acting in courage based off the truths that we have.
Well, I think of, anecdotally, everybody on my dad's side of the family is divorced. And, and so when Annie and I got married, it was 11 years of just failure and figuring it out and failure and figuring it out. And then after 11 years, we're like, okay, I think we know how to be married now.
That's what marriage is, actually.
And then we discovered that, marriage is essentially deadlifting.
One failure after another. Yeah.
Yeah. You just put more weight on the bar. And, but the point is that it's not, as my doctor father said, it's not ongoing tenderness punctuated by moments of hostility. It's ongoing hostility punctuated by moments of tenderness, because you're sinners and you're selfish. And the whole reason that you chose this and think you chose this person, your spouse, is because they make you feel good about yourself. They're a benefit to you. And when you don't feel they're a benefit anymore, you jettison them.
We make each other better people.
Right. No, you don't.
No.
I want to be a better person for my wife. I do. It's just
she's
that
pretty
most
good at
days,
showing me all of my failings and faults.
It's almost as if she's like a mirror or something that's been
Yeah,
held up
exactly.
and show me my flaws.
I mean, I guess that
It's
does
like we
make
were
you a better
watching Interstellar.
person.
So watching Interstellar in 4K last night, that's what I noted as one of the characters. We're watching this scene. It's the actress that plays Murph as an adult. And we're watching, and I just turned to Anne and go, she has terrible skin. Like, her skin complexion is terrible. Because in 4K, it's like, remember when HD came around, all these actors and actresses are like, oh, now they're going to see all of our flaws and blemishes. I'm like, sister, you don't even know.
Well, they changed all the
4K.
TV sets, right?
Right.
And they had to get they had to get Hollywood makeup artists for television.
Yeah, exactly. That's our lives in relation to the law. Is that it doesn't get, we don't go back to standard definition, the honeymooners circa 1958 quality TV. We're like, hey, God, I think I made a mistake. And God's like, hold on, let me adjust the HDR on this one. And you're like, oh, turn it off. It's hideous. It's too bright.
And what do you do in the face of that, though? Right? I mean, that's and this is the interaction. It isn't trite to say your sins are forgiven.
No.
But I like what Brandon said here in the chat. It doesn't help your feelings.
Correct.
And
feelings are like wild monkeys.
Right. I mean, what I would love is on the last day, like on the deathbed or in the resurrection, whenever it is, to be able to look back and say, for everything that it was a joy, right? It was a joy.
Yeah.
But I don't know that you can always say that in the moment. I think often you can't. But Jesus likens it. I've got we got the baby due any time, right? And Jesus likens it to childbirth, where he says, it's the woman and she's in sorrow because her labor has come, but then when the child is born, then there's joy, and she forgets her sorrow for the joy. And that's a picture of the resurrection. That's what he's talking about. Yeah. So I mean, he promises there will be joy, but not necessarily now.
Yeah. No, that's the nature of the law. It's, again, going back to this line in Interstellar last night that just destroyed me, is that Coop says to Murph when he's about to leave, he says that once you become a parent, you become your child's future memories. That's what you become. From that moment on, you're your child's future memories. And you're like, whoa, that's heavy. That's super heavy.
I still don't understand why the movie got panned as much as it did.
I think it's the best movie. I
think it is too. I mean, because it gets the science right.
I was going to say, and this is blasphemy to some people, but it's so much better than 2001.
Oh, yeah. 2001 is atheistic, so.
Well, I was going to say is that, one is atheistic and the other one is like, we're going to touch on something over here.
Right, it's more God in the machine kind of thing.
Right, exactly.
Deus ex machina.
But the whole movie is a study in the law.
It is.
Every character in the movie is confronted by the law in some way, shape, or form, and then ultimately,
Parent-child,
yeah,
scientist world,
yeah,
yeah, time, space, all of it.
yeah. Who is they?
Mm-hmm.
So we have, and here it comes, we have been so hopelessly dehumanized that for today's modest ration of food, we are willing, and I just read this, I want to review it. We are willing to abandon all our principles and our souls and all the efforts. And by the way, to put this in perspective, 65% of everything in the store isn't actually food. It's not. It's not actually food.
Why are you destroying the illusion? This is not fair.
95% of everything that the average American consumes is processed food. It comes out of a box or a bag, and it has almost no nutritive value whatsoever.
No, they buy fruits and vegetables.
Subway is being sued because their tuna sandwich has no tuna in it.
If that is actually true,
right? Well, they have all the information. They did all the studies, and they're not going to reveal it until they go to court.
No, they said it's not even that it's not tuna. That's not even fish.
Right. No, it's not tuna. It's not fish. Which, again,
what is it?
I'm like, why were you under the illusion that a fast food is giving you food? It's
or that
junk.
Yeah.
Right? It's Soylent Green, okay?
So now we're sued by Subway.
Subway's tuna sandwich is Soylent Green, okay?
For defamation.
That's right.
Just lining it up here.
Ding, 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 ding. But this is the point he's making, is that in Russia, in Soviet Russia in 1978, they had food cards, they had food rationing, right? In this country, we have food rationing. But because of convenience, we don't think of it in the same terms as, oh, well, in Russia, they had food rationing. Like, you couldn't just get what you wanted. You can go to the store and just buy butter. It's like, you can't go to the store now and just buy butter.
No. And you like here, I want to get my raw dairy. Good luck.
I don't know what you're talking about. That's illegal. The FDA says that raw dairy is bad for you. You should never consume raw dairy.
Well, what was the other thing? Making your own alcohol, right?
Yeah.
It's, and you're like, well, wait a minute. Historically, it wasn't distilling that was the problem.
Right.
It was the way that the distillers were unregulated, and they would cut corners.
Which, by the way, to your point, and I went down this rabbit hole by accident because I was looking for a milk can on Amazon, which gave me all of the distilling cans, right, to make moonshine.
Right.
I'm like, well, wait a minute. Stop.
You can no. This is legally you can own all of the components to make a still. You just can't have an assembled still.
Correct. It's like I can own all the parts of a gun.
You just can't have an assembled.
It's not assembled. Exactly.
Okay.
But I'm just like, that's America in a nutshell. Is I can buy all of the components to make a still, but I can't make anything in the still that it's It's like when you go to a smoke shop and they sell hookahs and they're like, it's just for tobacco. And you're like, really?
Or glass.
You mean a bong? Water bong?
Yeah.
You're like, yeah, it's for tobacco. I'm like, I have been around long enough to know that I've never gone to someone's house and had them pull out some drum tobacco and be like, hey, you want to smoke some drum tobacco out of a water bong? It's like, why are we playing these games? Why are we engaged in doublespeak with each other? But that's what he's doing here, is what he's pointing out is that, but we get food. We have food. Why should we complain about not having enough food? We have food. It's like, but what kind of food are they giving you?
Right. Well, what did in the podcast I sent you? It was an interview with a man who wrote something about socialism. There was a statement made, and I think we've made it on the show, is that the socialist wants or says that as long as everybody has what they need, that's enough. Whereas whatever the opposite of a socialist is to say, no, he used the terms in terms of car, right? So the socialist said, well, I'll do it the other way around. He said there's limousines and regular cars. And a capitalist, I guess we'll say, capitalist looks around and says, I think everybody should be able to get a limousine, right? And what can we do to get them to that? Whereas the socialist looks and said, I don't think anybody should have a limousine.
Right.
We should just get rid of limousines, right? So it's what lowest common denominator versus excellence or what. Why you would want a limousine, I don't know, but I'd like a nicer van, maybe.
Right. No, actually, I saved a video last night. I'll send it to you. And it's basically, there's 3 people in a classroom and one person walks into the classroom. And then they have to decide through this test who's going to be sent to this forum to speak on behalf of the school. And it was made 5 years ago, but you'll watch and be like, oh, it was made yesterday. Because in the end, the person with the lowest grades, who's the least intelligent, is chosen because of all his diversity points.
Hmm.
And so intellectually, physically, socially, and academically, he's the least qualified to speak on behalf of the school. But because he checks off the most boxes as far as, intersectional politics, gender studies types of things, all these things, he's the perfect choice for this.
It's kind of like looking at our elected leader, the regime, the cabinet.
Mm-hmm.
Are these really the most qualified people for these jobs? I mean, they certainly seem to be the most compromised in any number of ways, ethically, morally, financially.
Well, even my C squad basketball team in junior high could still put the ball in the hoop. Like they still had some skills. Like we were still skilled at basketball because we practiced and we wanted to be there and we loved it.
Just put a little effort in, right?
I'm just saying that they wouldn't even make the C squad of a basketball team.
Or
I'm just like, are you excited about basketball? Well, yeah, but I have no athletic ability. That's not what I asked. You're on the team. If you're excited about basketball, you're on the team. It's like, well, I don't really know anything about basketball. Even better.
What's the statement? You can choose to play the game or you can just not play it at all. Something
Exactly.
like that.
Yeah. Again, the subtle art.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the problem then, is that for a modest ration of food, we're willing to abandon all our principles and our souls. We serve mammon. And so all the efforts of our predecessors and all the opportunities for our descendants. But just don't disturb our fragile existence. We lack staunchness and pride and enthusiasm. We don't even fear universal nuclear death, and we don't fear a third world war. This also, by the way, goes to the point of being good stewards over creation.
Yeah.
We have already taken refuge in the crevices. We just fear acts of civil courage.
Just hide in your cave and it'll all pass over. It's like a rain shower or something.
So recently, I've talked to you about this in the last 2 months. A phenomenon has occurred in my congregation, is that there are congregations around me that remain closed, even though there's no government mandate that says they have to be. There's nothing prohibiting them from being closed, but they've chosen to stay closed because of the virus of unknown origins.
Mm-hmm.
And the existential threat, in my opinion, more than the physical threat.
That's been presented, yeah.
And so there has been this incoming flow of people into my congregation in the last 2 months that has now reached almost 24, and their families. And in my community, because this is a small, semi-rural community, their choice to drive to my church, to come into my church, and then tell other people that they're under my pastoral care, they're communing at my church, their children are being confirmed by me or going to our Sunday school class, is an act of civil disobedience against their families and their communities. Because these are not people that, we were members here for a couple of years and then no. These are people whose families have been members for generations.
Yeah.
So it's not a small thing for them to come into my church.
No, it's heartbreaking.
Excuse me. And not only that, but my church has a historical reputation for being very closed off, very judgmental, very German, right? This is St. John's. We're German. The Norwegian church up on the hill, we don't even talk about
You might actually say, in the context of what we've been talking about, morally, ethically,
yes,
kind of what disciplined.
Snobbish.
Well, snobbish or disciplined. I mean, you can
sure,
put it
absolutely.
negative or positive. Yeah.
Yes. In the present tense, 100% more. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And they're also very surprised to learn that I went to a seminary that is a part of the church body that they are coming from. So then they're curious, like, well, if you went to a seminary that is a part of our church body, but then you colloquized into the enemy's camp, what happened? How did you do that? And why are you here today?
We pay better.
Right. Oh, so much better. Man, the benefits.
The benefits.
Again, that jacuzzi, so comfortable after a hard day's work.
Well, I don't know. I mean, as you're talking about, I mean, looking at my own community, which churches are thriving and which ones are collapsing.
Mm-hmm. The ones that have moral courage, that the preacher stands up and says, not going to comply. I'm going to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ in all of its sweetness, but I'm also going to preach the law in all of its severity. I'm going to preach it lawfully.
Yeah.
And I'm going to call a thing what it is. I'm going to point at it and go, that thing is evil. That is Jesus. And then let people make up their own minds.
Right. And what's the accusation? That you're judgmental, right?
Right. Or, thank God, finally, someone who is judging.
That's the
Not
point.
judgmental, but judging between what is good and evil, what is lawful and unlawful, moral and immoral, Christ and not Christ.
Discerning between the division of bone and marrow, as Paul would say.
So what has happened now is I have, just this past Sunday now, moving into February, I have to recatechize my church. because now I have so many new people here who have never been catechized. And I mean, never. They went through confirmation, but they were not catechized. They went through Sunday school, but they're biblically illiterate. So I've put this, the insert for why we use the liturgy.
Right.
And it's very simple. It's 10 points. It's very easy to understand and comprehend. It's back in the pews. Because people are saying, this is kind of weird. But yet it reminds me of my grandpa's church. It reminds me of when I was a kid in North Dakota or wherever, growing up in church, Lutheran church. And this is nostalgic for me, but why are you still using it? And what's up with the these and thous and why the old hymns? And so I'm like, that's an awesome question. Thank you for asking the why. You should be asking the why. You should be seeking discernment. This is great. Test the spirits.
Correct.
And then this Sunday when we start confirmation up after service, and instead of saying we're going to have, the 8-year-olds and the 9-year-olds and the 10-year-olds, 12, everybody's going to be together in the same classroom. All the parents are going to be together with the kids in the same classroom. Anybody from church who wants to come is invited to come into the same classroom. And I'm going to start from zero, and I'm going to recatechize the entire congregation, which is super exciting for me because for me, it's like, okay, now I get to see as a pastor, what have I learned since the last time we had this?
But this puts you in the same tradition as Walther and Luther, who both advocated that you do this annually anyway.
Right, exactly.
For the same reason. I mean, Luther is talking about, after doing the Saxon visitations and how messed up the church was doctrinally, that they, or just not necessarily messed up. There's a difference between, I was thinking about this morning, there's a difference between lies and truth, but somewhere in between, and I would say maybe it's a different form of lying, is ignorance. Right? I mean, maybe you're not faulted in the same way.
Right. Ignorance is you're ignoring something versus naivety, which is I didn't know.
Right. So ignorance, and that's the going into the crevice that he talks about here, taking refuge in the crevice. I'm gonna play dumb, see no evil, hear no evil, that kind of thing.
Right.
And that is actually being evil. Being ignorant is believing a lie that you can ignore the truth.
I confess that I have sinned against you by what I have done and by what I have left undone.
Correct. Yeah.
Right, is that we always think, well, I didn't do that. And we talked about this with the imprecatory Psalms. There is a clear distinction between the sins that I have perpetrated against others and that which is perpetrated against me. I'm not taking ownership of being victimized by these people. However, corporately, like in Jeremiah's case, no, buddy, you don't get to leave. You're a part of this. It doesn't matter. The welfare of your people is your welfare.
Right, and that's what I think we've recognized as pastors of congregations, is that while our congregations are in one sense an oasis, a refuge, right, where they hear the gospel, they hear their sins forgiven in a way that they don't hear in the world.
Right.
On the other hand, our congregations are surrounded by those who are in need of that same message, right? So
right, I always talk about it's a fire base or it's a forward operating post in enemy territory.
Right, so we're not isolated. That's why I say this idea. What did Dreyer, who wrote a book based on this essay, he also wrote a book called The Benedict Option, which I think people misunderstood because they thought he was advocating for communes.
Yeah, withdraw from the world. Yeah,
withdraw from the world, but he was actually advocating for what you talked about. It's like, look, you as a community live in a disciplined life, and using the Order of Benedict as a model, but whatever model you want to use there. But lead a disciplined life, and then that becomes the example for those around you to say, there is another way, and it is centered on faith in Christ, rather than faith in some kind of utopian vision for our country or world, or really the utopianism that we have today is this transhumanism, right? That we can transcend all the limitations of human flesh, which is
actually
naive.
Dehumanizing.
Right. Well, that's the only way you can transhumanize is to not be human at all.
But they present it as such a virtuous and moral pursuit. It's a good thing to not be what God made you to be.
Well, it ultimately means you're more likely to die, and then they accomplish the ultimate goal, which is death and destruction.
Well, that's what's happening. I mean, you're talking to people who have already given up their humanity by putting garbage into their eyes and into their mouths, into their ears, and into their souls.
Right.
So it's like I say, it's hard for people to give up freedom when they're already enslaved to their smartphones. Like you've already given up most of your freedom to begin with. Exactly. And so when someone comes along and says, hey, you can have your smartphones, you can have social media, you can have all this convenience. We just want you to give up your Second Amendment rights. And they're like, I don't even own a gun, dude. Take it.
Well, you can take everybody's gun because I don't have one. Right.
Right.
You're like, well, what are you compromising with that?
Denominator, the limousine. It's like, why do you need a gun safe, let alone a gun?
Right. Well, aren't there like
Talk to the
taxes
Australians.
on large vehicles and that kind of thing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Special taxes. They're trying to limit the amount of them.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then we get into the whole law of registration and how the fact that you don't actually own anything because you registered it. Yes, there we go. So we fear only to lag behind the herd and to take a step alone and suddenly find ourselves without white bread. Hey, buddy. Without heating gas and without a Moscow, well, there it is, registration. According to Black's Law Book, if you register, you are now the property of whoever holds the registration. So when I registered my gun when I bought it in December, I don't actually own my gun. The federal government owns it. I actually don't own my kids.
No,
Like,
because they have Social Security card. Yeah.
Right. That's why civil services, social services can just come in and take my kids away from me whenever they feel like it, because they're not technically my kids. My car isn't my car. And as we learned, if you've ever bought a book from Amazon on Kindle, you don't actually own your books.
Well, this is an interesting side note, but I think it's important. I was researching, I asked this question on social, under what authority does the CDC and the TSA in tandem
Correct.
have to legislate particular, mandates, orders with penalties, and yet they're not laws, which I can't figure out. How's it not a law if there's financial penalty?
It's a mandate, not a law.
This is the clause. The clause is the Commerce Clause
Yes.
in the Constitution, which this is very interesting. So by you taking yourself across interstate lines, so from one state to another or internationally,
Yes.
you are now a piece of property
Yes.
that can be legislated or controlled by the Commerce Clause of the Constitution.
Right.
Now, wait a minute. We're treating people as if they're commerce?
Correct.
They're valuable from one state. Their value from one state to the next
Right.
is determined based off of their health. It's like, this sounds like cattle. Like, this can't stand up in court. Well, it has
And it has.
for
Yes,
a
it
long
has.
time.
Numerous times.
Isn't
Exactly.
that incredible?
Yes. Yeah, it is interesting because I always reflect on that clause in relation to the civil rights movement. Remember the placards that Blackman would, it says, I am a man. Like, because they were said, like, we're not 1/16th of a person. I'm a man. You can't beat me. You can't sick dogs on me. You can't put on a floor. You can't tell me I can only sit here. Or I can only go to the bathroom there or whatever. I'm a man. And it's like, well, constitutionally, you're not. I get your point, and I agree with you philosophically. You are a man. God made you. But legally speaking, you're not. And I'm not either.
Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3 of the U.S. Constitution.
But this is so extremely important because so many social experiments have been done about person sitting in a doctor's office, person in an elevator, kids in classrooms. These social experiments, the Stanford experiments about prison, and
Right.
is that, again, we all want to be enslaved, which is why the most dangerous person in any group or society is the one who is strong enough to stand on their own 2 feet and say, I disagree. That's the last thing that you want.
Yeah, because that person then presents a fissure or a fracture.
Correct. And other people might follow. It's
And
like
then
when
the
you're teaching a
crack will
Bible
widen.
study and you have a guest who's super biblically literate. Right? And you start asking all these questions like, well, what about Leviticus chapter 8, verse 3? And, well, what about in Joshua where it says this? And you're like, hey, with my Bible study. Versus, no, those are good questions. Why did you, what do you think what I just said relates to what you are referring to here?
Now, I pray for that catalyst to be there every Sunday.
But again, the underlying tension of they're going to start asking questions, and then other people are like, hey, yeah, I've had that question too, Pastor. And you're like, oh, here we go, chaos.
You know what? I think you just described the purpose of the show. This is the show where we get as derailed as we hoped Bible class would get every Sunday.
Absolutely. This is why I love confirmation.
Oh, because the kids will go there. Yeah.
Absolutely. They have no filters. Like,
Yeah.
does anybody have a question about the first commandment? I do. We got a new puppy, and he's super soft and cuddly. And I'm like, is there a question here? And they're like, oh, no. I'm like,
Pastor, do you think there's life on Mars?
correct. No, I think it's all a dream in a person's head as he's in stasis, actually.
Duracell.
No, the show, Life on Mars.
Oh, I got you.
The BBC show. It's so good. I actually was thinking about that over the weekend. It's funny you brought that up.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Life on Mars. It's a BBC TV show. It's so good.
No, I was thinking of David Bowie, but anyway.
It's so good. Anyways, it's the guy who plays the master in Doctor Who, the Tennant years. He's the star, and it's
Oh,
about
really?
a guy. It's about a policeman in present day who gets thrown backwards in time to the '60s, late '60s, and he's a British, and it's British police in the late '60s. And then there's this whole conceit going throughout the show, and I can't ruin it for you because the ending is definitely not what you would expect. It's a fantastic show. It's great. And then they tried to remake it in America, and it sucked.
You can see that like the next year.
Yeah, no, it's a great little. It's just one. It's one season, and then nothing more.
Yeah, well, it says it's 2 seasons, but one American season basically worth of episodes. Yeah.
See, that's why you listen to this show, folks. Not for this, not for the theology, just for the pop culture.
No, so you can get David Bowie in your hand. Life on Mars? Question mark.
Right? Well, Nick Ronson's the genius behind all that stuff, but we fear to lag behind the herd. We never ever want to be the person who stands out from the crowd, unless you're wired that way, like Gillespie.
A few people we know, yes.
A few people, right. Why? Because we have been indoctrinated in political courses, and in just the same way was fostered the idea to live comfortably, and all will be well for the rest of our lives. You cannot escape your environment and social conditions. Accept your lot in life. I'm sorry, I'm riffing off this now. But basically what we're taught is accept your lot in life, be happy with what you have, and stop complaining.
Yeah. You know what's interesting is thinking about a lot of the social commentary has been talking about how the boomers have ruined everything. And we've talked, I know you laugh, because we've talked about that in regards to the church, right?
Yeah.
And what did the boomers present is that you can improve, you can break out.
Right.
And that's why the social commentary is saying, no, that's wrong, it's faulty. They gave you false hope because, yes, we had the most rapid expansion of, of economy for our country, worldwide, really. Yeah.
So that point, actually, I never really thought about this before, but in relation to the millennials, do you think that's why they're trying so desperately to scare the hell out of the millennials? Because the millennials actually figured out how to turn their hobbies into jobs?
That's right.
And so they're not under control?
I mean, there's these kids in the basement that, I mean, even with the current GameStop price, they're multimillionaires by playing this long game with a stock that was undervalued, or maybe not, maybe they're faking. It doesn't even matter.
Right.
In the end, I mean, if they're holding, so whether they'll retain any of that value is a question, but they're having a good time. Right. And because they recognize the absurdity of the whole system, that it's based around a couple premises that don't actually, like we talked about, they're the rules of the game, but they don't need to be the rules. There could be different rules.
Right. Well, they're not. They're definitely not moral.
Right. Well, and then I was thinking, you mentioned kids that can make money off of their hobbies. The way that California enacted those new laws to regulate, what do you call them? Gig economy people, right? People who work, drive Uber and whatever. Yeah. That they have to file differently, I think is what the law said. Yeah. I mean, like, why are you getting involved? It's like they're making a living, they're taking care of their families. Like, what's your problem with this situation? Well, the problem is they're doing it in a way that we can't control. Exactly. This is ultimately too why I saw India is banning Bitcoin. Yep. And that other countries will either adopt it or they'll choose some other crypto. But
they legalized marijuana.
Oh, that's true too, because it was easier to control it.
In Minnesota, they'll never legalize it recreationally because they legalized it medicinally. They control the entire means of production in the state.
Oh, okay.
And produce the worst cannabis,
including distribution, right?
I'm because tongue in cheek, but everyone that I know who's gotten a prescription has actually dropped the prescription because they're like, "This is the worst cannabis I've ever had." And I'm like, "Well, so it's produced by the state. So why are you shocked?"
Yeah, it's the Russian white bread.
100%, exactly.
Okay, of cannabis. All right.
Yeah. So we've been indoctrinated. That's what public schools are for. And in just the same way was fostered the idea, live comfortably, right? America's a convenience store. Russia, everything you have is provided for you by the state. What more do you need?
Social Security.
You'll be fine you'll be fine for the rest of your lives. You can't escape your environment or your social conditions. Why are you trying? Everyday life is reality, dude. Accept it. What does it have to do with us? We can't do anything about that. We can't change things. I've talked about this before too in relation to even my kids. My oldest, who's 18, he is given so many choices that it actually paralyzes him. Yeah. That's the whole problem. Like, he's given so many options that he's like, I have literally no idea what to believe. We talked about this in relation to PSYOPs. I don't know what to believe anymore because it seems like everything the media says is a lie, or at least the
Yeah.
manipulation of facts. The institutions that I thought I could trust in are all completely corrupt, or at least they're only out for themselves.
They were
And
always corrupt. It's now
were.
they're overtly corrupt.
overtly. And there's invisible things that can kill me.
Maybe.
Well, you and I, but that's the indoctrination, right?
It's like that Weird Al song. It's a parody of a Nine Inch Nails song. They're all over me. They're inside of me. Oh, microscopic bacteria. So it's all about the paranoia.
It's 100%. The human body is just a channel for bacteria. You go in one end, you come out the other end, and in between is a tunnel. That's all it is. But we can do something about it, Solzhenitsyn argues. Everything. But
it's called Germs, by the way, the name of the song. Germs.
But we lie to ourselves for assurance. And it's not that they who are to blame for everything, it's we ourselves, only we. One can object, I think this is a misprint, but actually, they can think anything you like, or you? What is it? Actually, toy can think anything you like? What do you think that?
Oh, yeah, I don't know.
One can object, but actually...
I think it's you.
Yeah,
actually, you.
Yeah. So, the thought is here, we can't do anything about it, but he says, we can, actually everything. We can do everything about it, but we lie to ourselves for assurance. And it's not they who are to blame for everything, we ourselves, only we. And one can object, but actually, you can think anything you like. Gags have been stuffed into our mouths or over our mouths.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody wants to listen to us and nobody asks us. How can we force them to listen? It is impossible to change their minds.
I saw this in a tweet yesterday. It was responding to a Brian, what's his name, Setzer or whatever on CNN.
Yeah.
And it said, yeah, you can say whatever you want. You can write it on a piece of paper, but then you have to swallow it, and you're never to say it out loud in public.
Correct.
Like, that's freedom of speech, according to CNN today. Because they were talking about, what was it? Oh, they were talking about banning Fox News.
Mm-hmm.
This is CNN, a competitor, saying that we need to box...
because they're colluding, but okay.
They're creating a story out of nothing, I guess.
They're creating a story out of the other brand. We know politically, we know where the money went, we have the receipts. We know that both companies were riding the same horse into the White House. And now we know the gig is up. They're actually using each other to generate clickbait. Which makes sense. I mean, it's not, again, it's like, hey, when do we get the most views? When do we get when we're attacking them? And both companies are saying the exact same thing. And both companies are like, okay, but behind the scenes, we're both invested in the exact same political people, candidates.
This is what I've wondered about what Project Veritas is doing.
Right.
Because I watch what they reveal, like the insider Facebook stuff that came out yesterday.
Yeah.
And you're like, yeah, I mean, and it's crazy.
But
on the other hand,
benign evil?
Right.
Oof.
And yet, will it affect Facebook at all?
No. Not in the least.
Not in the least. So people wake up, maybe they leave the platform, maybe a few, but most people, they'll look at it and be like, I kind of knew that's their politics, or that's what they would do. Like, so
I know what I'll do. I'll delete my Facebook profile and I'll go on Instagram.
Yeah, I know. That's a little self-indictment there.
Yeah, a little bit.
Self-owned.
I can't quit you. I like the pictures. So he says, and this is great. This is so tragically funny. It would be natural to vote them out of office, but there are not elections in our country. In the West, people know about strikes and protest demonstrations, but we are too oppressed, and it is a horrible prospect for us. Going back to your whole point about razor wire and 26,000 troops.
Right.
How can one suddenly renounce a job and take to the streets? Yet the other fatal paths probed. Well, you get a check from the government. That's how you do it, as BLM and Antifa proved last summer. Yet the other fatal paths probed during the past century by our bitter rush in history are nevertheless not for us. And truly, we don't need them.
Wow. By the way, though, I don't know if it's, it's hard to know what's true about it, but then what's the guy's name? Navalny? The Russian opposition guy to Putin.
Right. I can't remember his name either.
They jailed, what was it like 2,700 people over the weekend
Nice.
from the protest there? Like maybe they did learn something from us in Russia now.
Yeah, right.
It only took 50 years, but but they're there.
Right.
And of course, unironically, we look more like Soviet Russia.
Well, I was going to say, it's almost like we were like, hey, are you going to use these tools over here? Because they're still good. They just need to be sharpened. They're fine.
Can we
And
put up your
like,
fences here and you
that's
can...
right. We forgot about those. Yeah, I guess so. But leave the chisel. We'll use that again.
Huh.
Yeah, no. Again, it's like some of us read 1984 and Brave New World as a cautionary tale. Others read it as a instruction manual.
I was thinking a little bit about that, though. I appreciated both books. I enjoyed them both, actually, on their own way, as a cautionary tale. But I think probably the most influential book for me, I've referred to it before, was Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it's a little heady because it's like late 19th century, right? I mean, 1890 something.
Yeah.
But it gets to the... It's about as rich a exposition on the human heart as
for sure.
as you can get, and the depravity of it, and it does then explains
1899.
Yeah, so then it really does explain like why do all these systems and processes and
right.
Political movements, why have they all ultimately failed? Why has none of them stuck around? Another thing, earlier in the show you made a comment, and I can't remember what it was, but it made me think a little bit about the American experiment and how it presumes a moral person.
Right.
One that's both, reflecting on the natural law of, that they can see and observe, but also that revealed in God's word, which of course the founders talked about. But I hadn't really thought through the timeline. The French Revolution was about 20 years after the founding of this country. Mm-hmm. And so the founders of our country intentionally went a different path than the French did. Mm-hmm. And we can see where that's gotten the French.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No offense to any French listeners, but they have a moral crisis beyond even our scale, I think.
My daughter's reading Candide right now by Voltaire.
Mm-hmm. Right, exactly. There's some things from Voltaire that are quotable and that are useful, right?
Well, but to the point, so she asked me about 1984. I gave her a copy. I said, if you're going to read this, probably read Animal Farm first. It'll help understand, 84 a little bit better. Right. And so I just been feeding her these texts, right? Because I want to turn her into a revolutionary. But that she keeps coming back when I'm like, hey, did you read the book? And she's like, yeah, I read it in like 2 hours or whatever. And she's a voracious reader. And every time she's like, this is today, Dad. I'm like, yeah, because again,
right,
there's nothing new under the sun. It's just we never learn.
Well, and I think we said this in a previous show that we try keep reiterating it, and with each iteration there is a revision, and the beauty, at least I think from the perspective of say a communist, like a Chinese Communist Party person, is that now we have social media. Yeah. And we had isolation. And you put those two things together, social media isolating and then physical isolation from a disease or from a virus. Yeah. And it's in a way, it's actually a perfect storm to say, oh, maybe this is actually what will bring about that Hegelian dialectic synthesis that we wanted,
right?
All along, where we can fully synthesize, whatever's left of capitalism into a communistic approach. So,
I was just reading an essay this morning. In the 30s, scientists were calling for a great reset.
I know
a new industrial revolution, a new way to organize humanity on a global scale. But
this was the whole Prussian project too.
Correct, but they lacked the technology.
Right.
Then in 1992, when Bush Sr. stood up there and reaffirmed their commitment to the Great Reset, it was because technologically they had jumped forward, obviously, by 70 plus years. So then, like we talked about, the thing that happened by coincidence that really then was like, oh, now we can do this, was the smartphone.
Ultimately.
And the internet with the smartphone, right? Because now you're connected on a global scale.
I don't know if our listeners have paid attention to this, but it was a huge cash cow that President Obama actually spent money to make sure that Africans had smartphones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think they called them Obama phones, if I remember right.
Yeah.
It wasn't widely reported. I don't think people made a big stink of it.
I was like, wait, what?
Yeah, we were buying smartphones for Africans.
But it was under the guise of education.
Mm-hmm.
If you have smartphones and you're connected to a satellite, it opens up the world.
Incidentally, the only currency that's worth anything in Kenya, for example, is Bitcoin.
Yep, exactly.
They do regular commerce with Bitcoin.
They don't use banks. They use their
No,
phones.
they use their smartphones that they got from
This
Obama,
whole economy. Yep. It's fascinating.
isn't it?
Nature finds a way.
We should probably. Don't you think we should probably take a break and come back to this?
Let's finish up with this last paragraph because it's kind of a thought break after this.
Okay.
He says, now that the axes have done their work, burning and looting down cities, or looting and burning down cities. Now that the axes have done their work, when everything which was sown has sprouted anew, we can see that the young and presumptuous people who thought they would make our country just and happy through terror, bloody rebellion, and civil war were themselves misled, otherwise known as useful idiots.
Correct.
No thanks, fathers of education. Now we know that infamous methods breed infamous results. Let our hands be clean.
And then he was imprisoned.
Yeah.
Same day. That's a pretty incredible paragraph.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He could literally speaking, no pun intended.
Well, he did. I mean, after he was
today.
After he was freed, I mean, he was regularly speaking in the States, warning, being prophetic.
Yep.
As someone who's seen it. By the way, I was thinking about that prophecy with Solzhenitsyn and the way that today, it's actually required curriculum in, I think it's middle school, what would be equivalent middle school in Russia, that they read Gulag Archipelago.
Okay.
Yeah, it's actually required reading that they read that. And I've thought about that because, we look at Putin and we say, oh, he's kind of like, Soviet kind of restyled.
Yeah.
I'm not exactly sure about that. I don't know enough. Russian, listeners can tell us, but we see actually, that's the reason why there's these mass protests and actual civilian revolt is that they actually are trained as children to read Gulag and say, don't let this happen again. And they see what's happening and they're like, we don't want it to happen again. And so they're actually revolting. So there's where education can be done in a way that actually, like you were talking about with your daughter, I think, our schools, maybe, this was the thing, it's now canceled, but the 1776 Commission, to say, maybe we would have a lot easier time, like, compelling our citizenry, to resist tyranny if they learned the history of this country and took it to heart and then said, oh, I see that. We've seen this before. Let's not do that again, But we're not students of history, which is, again, that's what we're doing on the show too. This is informative as much as it is catechetical, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So we gotta Christianize this. We gotta wrap this up with some catechetical stuff here.
Let's do it.
So this is not only the history of, like he's pointing out, like you don't learn from Russian history. But again, where do these principles of morality, virtue, freedom, even reason and reasonableness, where do these things come from? Where do they emanate from? The assumption from Solzhenitsyn and others is, well, they emanate from the fact that we were created, that we are of God. And once we lose that, and again, this is the basis for the communist revolution, is the state is God.
Right.
And
people don't have the capacity to think for themselves and to act responsibly.
A self-fulfilling prophecy because they actually indoctrinate people rather than educate people. Like
somebody ultimately gets to make the call.
Exactly. And so in the churches then, in Russia, the churches were allowed to exist so long as they didn't violate the status quo. So they have their liturgy, they have their icons, they have their, smells and bells. That's fine. But it's theater.
Right.
They're acting out their roles. They're reading from a script.
And it's abstracted from reality.
And it's abstracted from reality. You're going to heaven after you die. So again, going back to what he says, be happy with your lot in life. Be satisfied with your status. Whatever, if you're a pig farmer, be happy to be a pig farmer because that's
it's out of your control. There's nothing you can do.
Yep. And then when you die, you're going to go to heaven anyways. You go to a better place. And in the present tense then, and this is just my opinion, as a pastor, anecdotally, this is fundamentally why churches are closing and why they're still closed, why they stay closed.
Because we have to.
Because we have to. Because we have nothing to stand upon that strengthens us or encourages us.
Well, we don't have any reason to exist, ultimately.
We don't have a reason to exist ultimately because we've forgotten our own history in the church, which is a history of affliction and persecution. for proclaiming Christ. I quoted it in the sermon yesterday. If they hated me,
Right.
they will hate you for my sake. And
Right.
they will kill you thinking they are offering worship to God.
Right.
And
Well, that's why I
because-
read from Psalm 106, and you're looking at, how, granted, that was the nation state of Israel, which was a theocratic state.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, you look at it and it's like, no, this is God's people.
Yeah.
And what did they do? They went into idol worship, which was actually the worship of the state of Canaan.
Correct.
Because that was another kind of nation state, or, theocratic state. And they sacrificed their own children to it.
Right.
And so that's my question. It's like, what are you sacrificing today
Correct.
that ends up being your children's future?
Right.
You know?
By its very nature, and again, like I talked about with people coming to our congregation from other churches, the church by her nature is countercultural and subversive.
Correct.
Because the gospel itself is subversive. Paul saying, greetings in the name of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. The word Lord is Caesar.
Mm-hmm.
You're saying that I have one Caesar and it ain't Augustus. It's Jesus. That's seditious. And he comes out of the gate with that statement. And so because we in the church have enjoyed, again, a moment of peace and privilege in this country, we have turned our backs and stopped teaching the entire history of the church, which is, and again, like I'm doing on the other podcast where I'm talking about Christianity in Japan, in feudal Japan. The history of the Christian church in feudal Japan is one of absolute, we're going to wipe you off the face of the earth, Christians, because this doesn't fit within our system. And you're subversive and you're throwing everything out of whack.
Yeah.
And so they had to go where the samurai were at and allied themselves with the samurai class. And that whole thing. But in the West, because of Christendom, like we talked about, Christendom has simply established for us as Christians that, no, we're privileged and we enjoy a privileged status because we're Christians. Not because of Christ, but because of Christians and Christianity.
Right.
Almost as if it's become an ism. And that when you start preaching Christ alone for the forgiveness of sins, and you start preaching the law lawfully, and you start holding the line on the moral law, on natural law, and you just push the sacraments over and over and over again, especially in the face of an invisible enemy that you're told will kill you. Therefore, don't touch people, don't breathe on people. And I'm like, here's the chalice, drink from it.
And don't be around people at all. Yeah.
Right. And you're like, but like 40 other people just drank out of this cup. I'm like, yeah, go for it. And yes, I wiped down the inside and out of the side of the cup with the vodka rag, but whatever. The point is, when I elevate the cup, when I elevate the chalice and the supper, everyone who comes forward and drinks from this cup is making a political statement, whether they're aware of it or not. Period.
Yeah.
Because the government's saying no. It's like when you were told, well, you can't sing in church, you can't chant in church. And you're like, get bent. That's a political statement. If you're singing a hymn in church and your governor says you're not allowed to sing in church because it spreads COVID, that's a political statement.
Yeah.
Right? Where is Christ? At the font, at the altar, at the pulpit. And if you're preaching Christ alone, then you are preaching against any entity or person that is anti-Christ.
Yeah, who would take his place.
Who would take his place. Therefore, there's only two types of churches in the world, as Luther and others have pointed out. There's the Church of Satan and the Church of Christ. The Church of Christ preaches Christ in the sacraments and them alone. The Church of Satan preaches whatever the state tells them to preach. Or, more specifically, whatever they know will maintain the status quo so that they're not persecuted or afflicted.
Right, which is going to be some kind of form of therapy, soft language. It ultimately comes down to, where do you put your fear, love, and trust?
Exactly.
And also, Jesus' own statement saying, my kingdom is not of this world.
Correct.
Right. And so if your church basically looks like, I don't know, any other kind of social club, that begs the question to say, how is this any different than being a Mason? Well, there's not very many Masons anymore. Well, there's not very many Christians either. So,
yeah.
So, I mean, really, what's the big difference? The difference is that we put our fear, love, and trust in God's word and what he's revealed to us. And it's much like the GameStop traders to tie it in. Just hold the line.
Right.
And you hold the line, and you may get overwhelmed in the flood, and that's it.
Right.
But you held the line, right? You had something that you stood for.
I concluded the sermon with this yesterday, and I said, this building, this church could be burned to the ground and be reduced to cinder and ashes, but the gospel would still be proclaimed and the sacraments will still be administered because Jesus is risen. And I said, this world, the earth could be obliterated in a nuclear war and reduced to nothing but fragments floating through space, and the gospel of Jesus Christ will still be preached because you are still a baptized child of God.
Yep. Well, and maybe the part of the problem is that people don't think that we're in wartime.
Correct.
Which, again, razor wire on top of fence surrounding Capitol, beg to ask the question. I mean, I think some of the examples, I just did a Google search. I mean, just search for churches during wartime, and you see people gathered, soldiers and others, gathered in the midst of blown out churches
100%.
to receive the gospel.
Yeah, you look at pictures of Vietnam, World War II, especially Vietnam, though, right? That they clear DMZ, and there's an altar with an altar cloth on it, and there's soldiers on their knees. Yeah.
And this is just incredible. And these are soldiers, I think.
To me, personally, that picture is one of the most beautiful works of Christian art that you could possibly find.
Well, I mean, because of the confession there. What are you confessing?
Exactly.
Here's our priorities. And they're kneeling. I mean, it's just incredible.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you either hold fast to the gospel like Paul says, or you'll grab for anything that floats by to keep yourself afloat. But here's the trick. And this goes to Capen's point about the lifeguard. No matter what you grab, you're going to sink and drown. But Jesus went ahead of you and drowned for you, so that even in death, you're going to be raised. That's kind of our confession, the catechism about baptism.
Yeah.
It's a daily drowning and being raised from the dead. They can take everything from you, whatever it is, wife, family, goods, what Luther says in the Mighty Fortress is our God.
Right. Goods, fame, child, and wife, though these all be gone.
Exactly. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because Jesus is still risen from the dead. And as we sing, he is risen, so we shall arise. And that's the point, is that we have managed for thousands of years to have this conversation that you and I are having right now.
Yep.
Because the church is still the church, the gospel is still the gospel, and Jesus is still Lord of heaven and earth. And his enemies will still be made to become a footstool. So why should we be afraid? No matter what we do, he still has us.
Yeah, stand fast.
Stand fast.
What are you going to lose?
Exactly. You stand on Christ. You stand with Christ. You have nothing to fear.
Right.
In life or in death.
I mean, actually, that's the one thing you should fear, is to lose that standing, that faith with Christ. Yeah.
Exactly.
Good.
So stand fast. Don't let people censor you. Don't let people delete you. Don't let people cancel you. Don't let people tell you that you can't talk about Christ and the gospel and you can't interface with the world in this way. Because the church has done it for a while now and it's going to keep going with or without us. So why not join the party?
No paper hands, like Paul says. Hold those diamond hands in prayer. I'm learning all sorts of new expressions during this time.
I know, right? And by the way, tell your friends to join the live stream on Monday mornings.
Yeah.
Love to have a party. So
yeah, unless there's a baby.
Unless there's a baby, and then I'll be here alone and unrestricted.
Like the infamous Christmas episode.
Yeah, right. Riley's dying right now, so I just thought I'd fly this plane by myself.
Fly, quote unquote.
It's all butter.
I don't even think I got off the runway.
No, that's okay. The flight simulator.
You didn't watch it. You're just saying that.
Of course I didn't. I saw it. I saw it. I watched the first 3 minutes, and I thought it was mildly amusing and entertaining to watch you just talk to nobody.
There you go.
So thank you to everybody, as always, for joining us for the live stream and for listening to the podcast. We truly respect and appreciate you. If you would like, you can email 1517 and make a donation, make a contribution to support this podcast, all the other podcasts, all the books, all the articles, everything that we do at 1517 to put the gospel in your face.
Join the Telegram channel.
And we are plugged in. And otherwise, we'll read Solzhenitsyn again next week.
Yep.
And
it's heavy stuff, man.
We'll keep going this way until they cancel us. So
beautiful.
It's beautiful things.
Do you want me to play music?
You in his grace and peace today and always. Bye.
Bye. Yeah, there's the music. I know I was a little late on that.
Whatever.
Christmas episode was good. Look at that.
There we go. Tom also eats margarine.
Oh, come on. Bread. No, actually, about halfway in, I got to some content. And it was,
good. There you go.
That's why I left it up.
I like Tom's name. It's just a whole bunch of consonants. wrapped around some vowels.
Kurtzdorfer.
Well, I just like Tom with an H. I always like that.
Yeah, it's good.
Unique. If you're going to name your kid Tom, make it unique.
Thanks, Tom.
And the Kurtzdorfer. What is Kurtzdorfer? What's Kurtz? Speaking of Heart of Darkness and Apocalypse.
That's right. Apocalypse Now, yeah.
Dorfer. Kurtzdorfer. What does that mean in German, Tom?
Why are we still going?
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
Obviously, these people have no life. We don't. I mean, they're here with us right now. And we don't
Well,
have life.
especially you two. You can't even play it in the background on your phone.
That's true. So, yeah, no, join us for the live. Thank you, Theo. I am still working on the Bible study thing. I think I might just turn the Bible studies into podcasts and then post them for everybody. Little Villager? No kidding.
Yeah,
Oh,
that's
Dorf.
right.
Of
Yeah,
course.
Dorf
Yeah,
Village.
okay. The village. There we go. Okay. Kurtz. Oh, I always learned Kleine. I never really learned Kurtz in German. It was always Kleine. Huh. That's cool. Are you a little villager? And you're tall people. There we go. Okay. So your name's ironic. That's fantastic. Your entire existence is ironic. I like it.
All right. I'm going to end the broadcast now before this gets even worse.
All right.
See you.
Thanks,
See you,
everybody.
everybody.
We'll see you next time. Peace.